Good.
Okay,
Maybe.
so we're live. We have Senator Chris Bray, Chair of Natural Resources and Energy, in the witness chair. Before he begins, I'll just quickly say our committees have been taking steps toward each other for the last few weeks. I shared with him some of our concerns from reading through the latest amendment, and he has taken further steps towards us, and I really appreciate it. And if we had a natural resources amendment and then a further amendment from them and then an appropriations amendment and then an amendment from our committee, it would get really hairy on the floor. So
yes, I was totally confused by
yeah,
that. It would be really helpful to have an A, B, C, D. This is where, if everything passes,
right.
this is where we're ending up.
And yeah, and we'll make sure to do that, but
I like A, B, C, D.
I am not anticipating we will any longer have an amendment. This will do what it does, and the chips will fall from there, and we appreciate you, Senator Bray.
Good morning. For the record, Senator Christopher Bray, Addison, Seneca County. Thanks for the invitation to come in and talk with you and work with you some more. Actually, this is my first formal visit to the committee, but
We're
we've
delighted
had
there.
many conversations in the last months on housing and coming together with a consolidated position that I hope we'll be able to advance. Procedurally,
Pink memo this morning.
to
I'm
center.
just looking around this
Oh,
table. You didn't get the memo.
oh, I see. Oh, yeah, okay, that's fair.
Red and pink, yeah.
Senator Cummings, as you mentioned, there was a series of amendments back and forth. So having talked with Chair Ron Hinsdale and Secretary Bloomer and Council, the approach that's being proposed here is that all amendments are now folded into a single substitute report from the Natural Resources and Energy Committee. That way, we don't have to unthread 3 layers of amendments on the floor, which would be, I think, a little mind-boggling.
Yeah,
Because
very confusing for everybody.
people would have to work through the amendment and then keep in mind that it was going to be further amended, which is why I bother to take in what's going to change momentarily. So with that, I think you've seen a fair amount of this already. The original Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee amendment is unchanged for the most part. And I'm going to ask council to just, if you could explain how the yellow highlighting is used in here. That way, as we work through, people will.
Sure, Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. What's highlighted in yellow are the sections that came out of the Bray amendment and the new language that was being discussed in here yesterday. That was sort of the compromise language. So there are 3 pieces you have already seen from the Bray amendment, and then there's the particularized interest, and then there is the JO piece, which is the only piece of new language that is new.
JOP.
Great.
We're gonna get
Jurisdictional
there.
Sunset. Okay, I just don't know the word.
It's a cliffhanger.
Jurisdictional opinion.
This
It's
is
part
how we
of the
keep
Act
people
50
tuned in.
process.
What is a JO?
High drama bill.
I wanna learn more. All right,
You
so
haven't
the,
seen it yet, as I just said, so we will talk about it momentarily.
thank you for that. And so I would say what's happened since yesterday and then what's reflected in here is rather than changing positions, I'm hoping that the pendulum has stopped moving and that we will move on. What is captured in this based on conversations is clarifications. So there were, I think, positions for the most part were always either in alignment or not far apart, but there's always those questions, well, what do you mean by that? Like, how are you actually measuring that sunset and what are the legal consequences? So I'll just stick to the edits that are the new things. And if we want to talk about other things, I'm happy to do that. But so in the second instance, amendment was related to appeals. And on the bottom of page 2, starting on line 21 and carrying over to page 3, we were talking about a particularized interest. There was concern that and it referenced to a provisions in the chapter. Well, every single provision. And so there was a request from this committee to clarify whether or not that would be applied to a character of the area affected provision. And so that is, in essence, carved out as used in the subdivision, in particular, it shall not include the character of the area affected. So in the appeal language, we further clarify and constrain the bases for an appeal. On page 5, we revisit what designated areas are allowed to have unlimited priority housing projects developed. And we add in neighborhood development areas. So I'll own this one. We talked about NDAs. There's some questions about the various things that had to be done to win each level of designation. We moved on to address the broader concern on village centers, creating enhanced village centers. Once we finished that work, I meant to have us double back to NDAs and true them up. So here we take care of that by saying, yes, NDAs are included in that priority housing project exemption at an unlimited level. And that's that clarification. The 6th instance of amendment begins on page 7. Act 250 exemption requirements.
Do you want to take questions now or?
Sure.
It says until July 1st, 2026.
The sunsets have been in for most of the Act 250
Okay.
provisions, and there's a clarification about what
What happens if you've got the Cellaholm poured on June 30th, 2026?
You
You
are
gotta tell.
setting up the next suspenseful reveal.
Okay.
level. On the clip. Hang on.
Okay, so bottom page 7, that rolls on top of page 8 in order to qualify for the exemption. So this was, what do we, when we're talking about sunsetting in 2026, how do we, what conditions, what has to have happened to your point there about 2026? And so in order to qualify for the exemptions, the way we codify that is, we say in lines 2 and 3 there, a person, the developer of the
Yeah.
project, shall apply for a jurisdictional opinion under 10 VSA 6007 by July 2026. So that when you go to the NRB or to Act 250 and say, I'd like a jurisdictional opinion on my project, it will come back if you're developing a priority housing project in one of these areas. You're not subject to Act 250. That's what the JO will say. You're not subject to Act 250. You're exempted.
Okay.
That's your,
Do I have to go to Act 250?
that's who issues the JO. So that's who can say you are officially not obligated to participate in Act 250. Just like you would now, any project, are you in or are you
Okay.
out of Act 250? You ask
So what,
them.
You want to be walked through like what?
well, I'm just trying to figure out, this ends July 1st, 2026. That's, I believe, an election year. It's off season. Is this all going to end? Is it going, are you going to leave people hanging in limbo to
No.
get a thing until the next legislature gets in and acts? I'm getting signals from Ledge Council that there's an answer.
There's an answer and it comes, well, so to the second half of this new clarification around the significance of the sunset is, one, you get a JO by July 1 of 2026. That says you are not going to be in it. You're exempt from Act 250. The second thing is, well, for what happens in the years after? You said you have a cellar hole, but now it's July 2nd and you're.
No, I'm a
trouble.
developer and we still need housing and we will. I'm just wondering, does this foresee that you're just really nervous about opening the floodgates and that at some point we will reevaluate
Yes.
and say, but if we have to do that by 2025, I doubt that's going to be enough time to make people feel comfortable. And if you have people with projects that like to start, but as of July 1st, when there's no legislature, everything is in limbo probably for the next year till we get back and act. Is there anything that says that there's an expectation that this will get evaluated in 2025?
I mean,
Yes.
we have 3 legislative sessions before July 1, 2026. So I'm not
Might there be
telling
a
the
change?
future, but you know,
But we do have the Affordable Heat Act coming back, which might tie up a certain amount of time.
there's a lot of speculation here. But-
Keith?
No, I'm just wondering, is there an what
No,
is
I'm
the
not gonna-
expectation?
Yeah, I'm not making light of any, but I will say, so here's 2 things that happen. One, in the next line, 3 through 5, we address. So 1, you get your JO by July 1, 2026. Okay, so now what happens? Is this, and it says the jurisdictional opinion shall require the project to substantially complete construction by June 30, 2029. So you get your JO, you have 3 more years to build. So it's not like the next day your project has to be complete. It gives you a 3-year window for construction under any JO issued by July 1, 2026. So there's no cliff here. Anytime during that window, from now through 26, the legislature will have a chance, as the chair was saying, to revisit. The other thing we're anticipating is both ACCD is bringing forward a report on the enhanced designations and how that system might be revised. The NRB is bringing forward a report. Both these are as a result of legislative requests on further modifications to Act 250. Those are both due by the end of the year. So when we come back in 24, we'll have the benefit of those reports. We'll have 24 and 25 to use those reports and modify things. Meanwhile, we give people a green light for accelerated development all the way through July 1 of 26, knowing that your opinion, the jurisdictional opinion, entitles you to keep building all the way through 29.
Okay, but is that just for priority housing?
Yes, I mean,
Okay, which
that's what
is,
this applies to.
I didn't think priority.
There's
housing-
other sections.
Let me back off. That was the primary concern that I had when I talked to him, but it's a broader.
It's also the 25 units in designated areas, so any
That's what I'm
25 units
priority.
of housing. So
okay,
it is priority housing project, but it's also regular housing.
It includes both.
Thank you.
Senator-
Yeah, I'm sorry, this says apply by July 1.
Yep.
But what you're saying is have the opinion by July 1. I just want to point that out, and so we should talk about that more. But we can talk about it later if you want.
Well,
Apply is different than having the opinion.
I don't, so,
I wrote apply.
yeah,
Which is good, because applied means it could take some time.
yeah.
Okay,
It's-
apply means also that it.
You're in the works.
if there's
Okay,
something
but that's
they
not
have
what
to
he's
have
saying,
to
so I
predate.
just think we need to be super clear about that, and it deserves more of a conversation.
So I just want to remind everyone that under land use law, your rights, you have
Vest.
vested rights under the law at the time you make an application. That's actually standard in land use law. So I use the word apply because generally, even now, under Act 250, if the law changes while you have an application that's in process, the law at the time of the application is the law that applies to it.
Right.
So I think that this fits
But also,
other
Interesting, okay.
this is an unusual scheme, but I think I tried to build it into the existing Act 250 legal framework.
the other
All
thing
right, that's
I would
helpful,
say
thank
is
you.
this is a more liberal interpretation
Right.
rather than have him hand a JO, which also could make some people a little queasy because like, well, I applied, but how timely was the review?
Right,
And that would be out of the applicant's control. So this way.
In their
it is
control
in
is
your
the
control to
application.
make an
Yeah.
application. It's not
Really
under your
fair.
control when you're going to receive the JO.
it's
Um,
good that we know that.
Good, okay, thank you.
So that's because we're supporting the development of housing. We leaned into
Good
it
for
yet
you,
again.
yeah.
So then there's some further clarifications in sub B. this is the enhanced village center. We said, okay, really designating an area for development isn't really, we're trying to say, if you planned and made an investment in terms of some infrastructure and planning and support for it, then you can get we're saying, let's support housing there. And we listed 3 conditions to gain that enhanced village center designation. They start on line 19 of page 8 and carry over on to page 9. The first one was permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws. The second was related to water and sewer, and the third was adequate staff and support for your planning program. B formerly included municipal sewer and water, but there are other ways to provide that same functionality. So based on other pre-existing language elsewhere, this is more, gives more latitude to the municipality on how they would get there. So it could be, it was one of the following: municipal sewer infrastructure, a community or alternative wastewater treatment approved system approved by the Agency of Natural Resources, or a public community water system. So we wanted to accommodate different ways of getting to the same end in different village centers.
No, that's helpful.
And then we brought the same language to NDAs. Equivalent language, it's spelled out a little differently, but it's functionally the same. So this was a truing up part of the process that I mentioned at the beginning. Once we worked up village centers, we should have come back to NDAs and included them from the outset. So again, there was us working under the gun. We didn't get back to NDAs, but here we are. So neighborhood development areas served at least by one of the following: municipal sewer, meaning alternative wastewater system approved by ANR, or C, a public community water system. So in that way, we end up truing up NDAs with enhanced village centers. We address the JO clarifications of what do you really mean by July 1, 2026? And we square up the concern that this committee had about appeals based on character of the area affected. All these things are not folded into a single amendment, and it will, I talked again to sort of end where I started. The proposal I'd be making to this committee and to Natural Resources and Energy is that we move to replace our committee report with this report, and this carries, it's one basket for all the amendments.
And to clarify what you just said, the Natural Resources Committee is also looking at this today
So we'll
Yeah.
to
both
approve
be-
it. So we're both getting it at the same
Yeah.
relative time to.
Nothing,
use the
nothing
plane.
but fresh material in front of us today, nothing stale.
So it's almost 8:30.
Yeah.
I'll take questions,
Sure.
if you are okay with that.
Anyone?
Yeah.
have-
Senator
No,
Cummings.
this is fine.
Okay.
This is helpful. I think what would be really helpful for me, as a visual learner,
a chart.
we can, yeah, no, not a chart, a map. I like maps.
Oh, wow.
We talk about designated areas that, and I don't think it's Ledge Council that's gonna do this. But somewhere, I hope, there's a map where it says, this is a designated
Yeah. That would
downtown.
be really good.
This is a designated village, because I'm
And this one's
shooting in the
allowed.
dark here to be able to understand exactly
What-
where are these,
And what's
what are,
permissible.
yes.
So
and
what I
what's
What I
possible.
think John Adams might be able to help us with, he could do one that has all the tiny little dots on a full map. And then he could have some pages that show maybe an example county that has the, because most of the NDAs and growth centers wrap around a
Well, that
downtown.
was the vision.
So we
The
could,
Douglas
you
administration.
can pick your county, we can find one that has a couple of these different, has a very amount of these, you
Yeah.
don't have to do Sydney County, or whatever makes sense.
So while maintaining, some planning constructs that I think everyone has supported in terms of smart development, thoughtful questions about, do we have the capacity, sewer, water, et cetera, that make for well-planned development, and also development. We've had developments that have subsequently had real problems because they didn't have adequate sewer and water, and towns have to get involved in taking things over so all the planning supports a total of 271 different entities for accelerated housing. That is 24 designated downtowns, 6 growth centers, 12 NDAs, and 229 village centers, all eligible to become enhanced village centers. So I hope that this will put us on the path of doing a lot more housing and will buy us time for further review of designations, NRB, but meanwhile, we'll greenlight a lot of development. So with that, I'm gonna say
Thank
thank
you,
you
Mr.
for the
Chair.
opportunity to visit.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back to refereeing.
Good. Good luck.
And-
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you. So I'm just gonna have Ellen go to the witness chair in case there are any further questions, and then have us discuss this and take a vote.
Yeah, I can stay till 10.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Try to work.
I mean, if I could leave before.
Oh, I
that would
don't
be
think,
great.
yeah, No, I don't think we need an hour and a half. And Scott's trying to work on other witnesses that we've had dotted throughout the next 2 days to come in at 9 and 10:15. So just to preview that, basically, we do have Mike DeRocher at 10. We will have already, I think, had to make a decision on this, but we can still talk to him about, we've asked him to do 3 studies and how is he doing, because we've already invited him in. Between 9 to 10 and 10:15 to 11, I'm currently hoping we can get a combination of JFO to talk about the housing inventory and to preview sports betting, just because we might have those folks close at hand. But otherwise, if we run out of things to do, we'll also let people know early, Scott's doing his best. So
So does that suggest that we are not going to take any testimony in terms of reaction to these changes and the changes we proposed from a number of the organizations that have weighed in previously?
if those around the room want to react and weigh in before we vote, that's something we can do. Everyone else is kind of flexible, but we just need to try to tell Scott if we're delaying anything that he's attempting to get. Senator Clark.
So forgive me, I'm sure I should know this, but I would love to go to understanding the master plan permit better.
Oh, sure.
Because
I would be very happy to hear them.
I had assumed, well, I've been listening to this for, Dick is my district partner, so I've heard his idea for this for a while. And it's his mirroring, as we know, the industrial parks, but it's sort of trying to create an umbrella permit for a designated area. And quite honestly, I think this will be part of the conversation of DHCD as they do review the designations and decide how they want to streamline, because it's sort of silly to have all the different designations we have, which is why we asked for this study a year or 2 ago. I can't even remember anymore. But what I do know is it's coming, which is exciting. However, at the moment, we have in front of us a master plan permit option. I assumed that, and maybe incorrectly, that if you secured a master plan, and I don't see a date, and I may be just missing it, it's in the enacted dates, and I just haven't connected the dots. But if you got a master permit, you were exempt from Act 250. So no, okay. So what's the perk of getting a master plan if it doesn't exempt you from Act 250?
So the municipality will hold the master permit, so they will do the upfront application.
So that makes it simpler for village, for smaller towns that may not have the staff to do. Okay. Is
So,
that the idea?
and municipalities do not pay Act 250 fees.
Right.
So, any
I didn't know
future development within the area that's subject to the Act 250 master permit only needs a permit amendment to the extent that
Okay.
it is differing from what's already in the permit. So like if you picture downtown Montpelier, because that's kind of what I am familiar with, you would get a permit that would cover a series, an area it could be up to the full size of the designated downtown or neighborhood development area, or only part of it. And so then in the future, if there is a change that would normally require an Act 250 permit, or in this case, a permit amendment, so a substantial, a material change to the area. So a business who, there's already an existing shop front, but they're going to do some like minor construction to reconfigure. They're only going to need to include in their application for a permit amendment the changes that are occurring that are not already covered in the master permit.
So it's an adjustment of.
Yes,
a
and
permanent
so
adjustment.
the master permit will have addressed all of the 10 criteria.
Right, I got that.
And so then the future amendment will only need to address the criteria that are being affected by that individual.
Got it.
Okay,
So for the,
I thought I kind of understood this, but I'm trying to figure out. You threw me when you said they might just need a minor adjustment to their storefront. Right now, there was a storefront downtown that had a slanted plate glass window. It did not fit with downtown. It took, I think, 2 years to get a permit from the city's design review to change that plate glass. It actually was slanted out, very 1950s. So would that have to go through Act, and who would have to apply for the permit adjustment? The municipality or the developer?
so the standard when a permit already exists is a material change that would have a significant impact on one of the criteria. So
Right, so
that potentially wouldn't trigger Act 250, as with all
I
these
would hope
things.
it wouldn't. I
No.
mean,
These
yeah,
are very site
it's already
specific
hard.
issues. But,
But-
if they were going to change the nature of the business that was in there from the prior one, and it was going to be a restaurant as opposed to a shopping set, like a store, that may increase traffic there. So
that
that
would
might be
have to go to Act 250 now?
potentially. So potentially,
So I wanted to change Pinky's Sub Shop to, I've never heard of anything like in a downtown area. You have to do traffic at the local. I've never heard of anything like a change of use in a downtown triggering Act 250.
because you're designated
well,
downtown, so
it
you're
can,
already,
yes, it can. They often don't, because if a individual shop is a very small footprint,
Yeah,
the trigger is 10 acres. So potentially it wouldn't.
no,
Yes,
there aren't too many downtowns
Right.
with 10 acres.
I was gonna say.
Maybe Springfield has some factories that,
we're like a big box store.
but
there
they-
aren't very many
Not in the
downtowns
downtowns,
with
though.
big box stores.
Yeah. Okay,
So
we're like,
how would this interact? Montpelier, Vermont College has a master zoning permit. I think I don't think it's a PUD. It's now on the market, and there's all kinds of concerns, but it's pretty much sitting there vacant. Is that, it never went through Act 250 before. Is it going to go through Act 250 if it impacts traffic at the lights at the bottom of East State Street?
are you asking me under the terms of this bill or in
Or,
general?
well, in general, I mean, there's planning and zoning. Every town is different, but the ones with planning and zoning, it's pretty complicated to work through that. And I think we're trying to make it a little easier to put some housing in an area that's been designated for housing. I'm just, when we start talking about a change of use in downtowns, I get nervous.
Well,
Yeah.
we can continue that conversation over the next
however long when these studies come back.
Yeah, I
Because
think
the
the
village is
DHCDs,
housing.
we're gonna really have a
Right.
robust, no, I think we're gonna have a robust conversation
And I think
about all
in the
those
fall, I'm
designated
hoping we
areas
can do some
whatsoever.
field trips and visit our
We-
downtowns.
We
and
could,
So
talk about this more.
the big picture thing I just wanna say is that the master plan permit is a different strategy.
and it's a housing,
Right.
It's not an exemption.
Mhm.
It is working within the Act 250 existing
okay.
process to take some of the onus off of a developer. So the municipality does the upfront work of preparing the application, going through the initial Act 250 process.
oh, that's a
And
big
then
help.
When the developer comes, they only need to pay the permit amendment fee, which is typically lower than a regular Act 250 permit fee. And they only need to address criteria that they are changing by the nature of whatever they're going to do. And so in certain circumstances, there may be no change at all because the town has already said, this is a shopping district. Any future shops are not going to be a change. So it is taking onus off of a developer in this situation. The town would have to apply for it and they would have to actively complete an application. So that is a different strategy than some of the other things you have worked on.
And I guess, I mean, we'll just have to see if anybody is willing to experiment with this over the next
Right.
year and revisit it. I think we all have different hypotheses about how well towns will be able to take this up and implement it. But we can keep it in mind.
And I do just want to say, so this currently exists for growth centers. So
Yes.
currently, a town that has a growth center has the option to do this already.
Yeah,
So this is expanding it to downtowns and neighbor development areas.
right. And we don't have Jake Hemrick in the room, but when I saw the words master planning on his presentation, I asked like, oh, we already have a master plan, how's that going? And he said they're just not very widely used, so.
Well, like NDAs haven't been until, I think this will help
Right.
promote NDAs. So there, it expands it to downtown and village centers, right?
No, downtowns and NDAs.
And NDAs, right?
Yeah.
And it already exists for growth centers.
Is there a reason we don't want to do it for the other areas, make it available? I mean, has that been a robust discussion, you know?
Yeah, so NDAs and growth centers require zoning.
But I
They
mean,
have.
master plan, like if a town wanted to do a master plan and there wasn't zoning, like, in theory, they could still develop something. You know, the plan could define areas, but that might be too much of a conversation, like if that's already been a conversation.
I mean,
That was the choice.
yeah.
Okay,
We can
I'll
keep
talk about that another
question
time. Okay.
Open and talk to our counterparts about that, but, you know, we're also putting a lot of money into trying to get bylaw and zoning into
Right,
communities.
right.
Yeah, we're trying to
Okay,
encourage people to identify growth centers in their bylaw modernization.
okay.
Any other questions for
No,
Ellen?
thanks. Thank you for, I'm glad we have streamlined the amendments.
Yes, it makes
Big improvement.
your job easier as majority.
It makes all of our jobs
Yes.
slightly easier, although
So we can, Ellen, I don't know if you'd rather leave. I think I don't know. And I also don't know if people around the room want to weigh in before we vote.
I would like, until we can ask John Adams for Matt and coordinate John and Ellen on,
Well, one thing we can do is look at a map digitally right now. We
Yeah,
can't, we could make sure he can help us modify it for the floor, but we have, Scott's ready to pull up.
right,
maps.
but we don't have all the integrated green lights and different abilities in each section, in each designated area. That would really be helpful to just list what is now, what we are now green lighting and what is possible in each designated area.
Other question I have
Yeah,
is,
just even in writing.
we need housing. I've heard 20,000 units in 10 years or something. We've got all these designated areas. But how much of these designated areas are already populated by housing? How much housing is it possible to put in those areas?
I think quite a
If we
bit.
just say the designated areas are the places, well, you think quite a bit.
Yeah, but we don't.
I
we
don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if we are just saying, well, you can put a few more accessory dwelling units in an area that's already packed with housing. Or are we saying we are actually opening up X more acres or, I mean, that's been my,
It's a very live question.
Yeah.
And I think JFO is trying to help us with the housing inventory, and VHFA is, we're trying to give them new tools to, help. I mean, they're our best source of housing information. I think some of the great work we've done over the course of this bill is look at geographic mapping. JFO has been sort of accelerated to work on a housing inventory that we can keep track of here for our own purposes, and VHFA is getting new tools to count houses.
If I may, but I agree with you, and I think that's a question that
don't
we
know
would
where
have to
housing is
ask.
like everywhere.
That would almost have to be individual to the 271 areas that are able to develop more housing. Each one of them would have to come back to us and say, well, there is this much open land. There are these many buildings that could be redeveloped and repurposed. I mean, that is like an individual lens on each one of those 271 growth
okay, but
designated areas.
if I'm a town that doesn't want more housing, I'm not having any designated growth areas. That's it. We're not stopping that. I like my 3-acre zoning, nothing's designated. We need housing, and housing that will work for nurses, for doctors, for teachers, for middle income folks. We're changing a lot of stuff, but I feel until I see how much area I'm actually opening up, I don't know if we're making any progress or we're just rearranging, what is it, the teacups on the Titanic? I mean,
Deck chairs.
deck chairs, whatever. That to me is, and we're doing, this place is doing a study, and this place is, someplace we need to sit down as a state and say, if we want to have housing, or we want to have doctors and nurses and teachers and mental health workers and,
Engineers and plumbers.
and engineer, all those things.
Yeah.
This is where the jobs are. This is where we're going to put housing. To talk about a designated village in the Northeast Kingdom where there isn't any jobs isn't really helping the problem.
Well,
And I think that's what I feel a lot like we're moving the deck chairs.
I will say, this has to be a shared conversation between our committee and finance,
It
because
does.
we talked about even adding number of units to the grand list. That would be a question for our afternoon committee,
Right.
looking at how we start to change maybe how we categorize types of property as
Yeah,
well,
but
so.
That's fine, knowing how many units are on the grand list, but what I don't know is where are they? I mean, can I put 5
we
accessory
would
dwelling
know if they
units
were
up the
grand
hill in
list.
my backyard?
No, yeah, if it's on water and sewer, you
I
probably.
most certainly am. They're
You-
putting
you-
150 units of
So, and
Habitat for
I
Humanity.
think that's what this bill is doing, is in those areas that are served with the
I
things
don't
that we
think I'm a
need.
designated neighborhood.
I'm looking at VHFA.
I think it's being served by
to
water and
see-
sewer.
Oh, it most certainly is being
Like
served.
you're trying to make a
There's
lot of
still
progress
150
on
units
on
going suck
data.
out of the water bill.
Yeah, the data, Chad Simmons, Vermont Housing
Hi,
Finance.
Chad.
Good to see
They've
you all
been here
this
for
morning.
2 days.
Yes, so we are making inroads and partnerships with the Air DNA and expanding that. And DHCD has some tools, and I think we talked about that already, that are being utilized. I think those might be 2 different things in terms of
Right.
data.
I will say, just from our conversations, I think more people are starting to use housingdata.org too, which
Which is great.
if you are a town planner, I mean, then if you look at that, you have a lot more information than I think people realize to make good decisions. Does it get funneled up at the statewide level into something that we can look at every year for metrics? Maybe not yet, but that's the
It's on its
ongoing
way.
conversation. But it's pretty, I mean, it's pretty darn good, like what John can do when we look at where are the jobs and where are the.
Yeah, that I know. But what I don't know is if what we're doing here is making any significant dent. Because I don't know how much housing, how much have we opened it up to cram how much housing where? I mean, if 80% of the designated areas
Yeah,
are already built,
yeah.
then how much am I opening up for further?
I mean, what we would know is next year, a lot of our housing partners would be able to come back and say, we got X number of units of priority housing into the pipeline. I mean, that kind of information, they keep track of if they're touching a project. How many people duplex? I think we'll have a hard time with some of the small changes that could have a big impact that starts to become kind of less seen, but towns also, will hope in some areas they'll know if somebody's, duplex or ADU or whatever.
But I think it's a good question and concern, which is how do we measure our success with this
Yes.
bill?
Yes.
And I think
Yeah.
that is, I don't know, I would welcome a better understanding of how we can measure this, because you're right. In Woodstock, you have to take what you know. We have plenty of open land in Woodstock in our village center, particularly if we can do a broader thing, because our village designated center is very small. But if we can do the band around it, there's actually quite a bit of land that we could either repurpose and rebuild and or develop. And there are tons of duplexing opportunities and even more ADU opportunities.
And the 5 units.
Exactly, and the 5 units.
To it.
So,
Does anyone want to build them?
But that's another question. That's not our job. Our job is to enable builders. Our job is to make it possible to create a regulatory framework to enable the private sector to go for it. That is our job. And so what we're trying to do is balance our smart growth values with our protecting our environment values. And I think we're doing it. And I think I think we're landing in a pretty good place. I'm pleased. And it's really helpful to think about 271 areas that are able to develop more housing.
Right.
I think that's really what we have to focus on
And I will say a lot of the
and we're
money,
enabling that.
a lot of the money we're putting in this bill would benefit those areas that we're now green lighting more growth. That's one of the biggest problems we were trying to solve for, is that we don't want to put money into projects that get stopped by their own devices, by their counterparts in planning. This is generally, we're talking about PHPs and the kinds of projects that we are funding that will now have more.
Right, that are public dollars in it. Yeah.
Ellen.
And I just wanted to add that in S100, as you passed originally, section 11 is still intact, and section 11 directs the regional planning commissions
Right.
to update the regional plan to include community level needs for housing, the type, it's looking at current and what they would expect to be needed for their individual region with location, quality, types, and costs.
Thank you. I was like, I know we did more with that.
So,
That's really helpful.
so that is also having the regional planning commissions work on this more specifically and try to connect some of this.
And the
as well.
navigators for all those little projects, so that people could say, it sounds like I can do a duplex or an ADU. I don't know where to begin. So if they can come back and tell us, we were able to bring X number of new projects.
Yeah, and that's actually where some of this data, to go to your question, and how do we measure it? I think our home ownership center partners are the ones that will be able to. I mean, I can tell you, or at least a couple of weeks ago, we had 114 applications for ADUs out there, and I knew 12 I think are being built with the Windsor-Wyndham Housing Trust. I mean, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's all happening, and they have the data on that and where those are.
Senator Brock.
We know that we need a substantial amount of housing right now. We have a number of houses that we need in the next 20 or 30 years. And my fundamental question is, based on what we're doing, is this going to make a dent in getting us to where we want to be? And I have my suspicions as I look at this. Second, I'm concerned about the suspense dates of 2026 and basically cranking things back at that point in time. Maybe that may not be the intent. Maybe it's the intent just to simply review. But just given the supply chain, given the staffing levels that we have, given again that we haven't effectively reduced the bureaucracy associated with the process, I see us at 2026 being back here again, doing this all over again, because we haven't made a dent in what we need to do. I think we have a number of folks who have interests who are here in this room. I would like to hear from some of them as to what they see based on these changes in particular. But I'm very concerned about the timeline and the limitations associated with this, as to whether that sends first the right signal, and second, whether or not it actually impedes the process anymore. All in all, as I look at the bill, I think the bill that came out of here was a good bill. I think it made progress. It wasn't perfect by any means. I'm not convinced that what's being done here is helpful.
So that's not an Ellen question. So I heard, and it wasn't a question at all. So we can meet that request, I think now, but we can't force anybody who's not ready to speak to speak. So Ellen, do you want to move, or do people want to get in the witness chair to speak?
If you can hear me from here.
Yeah, as long as that's okay, like vision wise. Okay, yeah, just people want to identify themselves for the record.
Yeah, Peter Tucker, Vermont Association of Realtors. Just a couple of comments on this, and one of the, I guess, my overarching comment, and you've all heard it already, is that, for instance, the 25.5 is really limited, right? It's downtowns, neighborhood development, 24 downtowns, 12 neighborhood development areas, and 6 growth centers, pardon me, of which 4 of the growth centers are already attached to downtowns, right? So there's going to be 38 municipalities that can take advantage of the 25.5.
Well, and then the enhanced village center is good.
So I'm going to get there. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes along with the master plan. Senator McCormick called it an umbrella permit, which for me, visually that helped. But how long, and he said, geez, this will simplify permitting down the road. But what municipalities are going to take that on? How long is it going to take them to get it before they could start to offer the amendment portion? The amendment portion makes sense, right? But I just feel like, a municipality looks at this is a multi-year project to get it done. Enhanced village centers, the Natural Resources Board is supposed to provide updated zoning and permanent zoning and bylaw language by the end of the year. So nobody could go for an enhanced village center until then, until they know what it is. But the Natural Resources Board has a list of 10-acre towns and 1-acre towns. 10-acre towns have permanent zoning and planning. There are about 130 of those, and they're the little villages in Vermont that I feel is where we're really going to see some effective infill development. Go back to the concept, right? You want compact development in villages and municipalities, obviously. One other thing, the jurisdictional opinion on the as to whether you would qualify for 25.5. So let's say you're in a downtown, you say I've got a 24-unit project. Jurisdictional opinion is still going to be by Act 250, right? I mean, it's going to be, you're going to have to go to Act 250 District Commission to get a jurisdictional opinion on something that doesn't need to go in front of Act 250. So I'm not sure that that's really accomplishing the goal. So yeah, those are my comments.
Okay.
Mhm.
And I will say, because so many municipalities have so many different processes, this was obviously the work of the other chair, but we talked a lot yesterday about where a sunset could exist, and I didn't hear any clear bright line that could otherwise give that to us. So I just want, the banks couldn't help us. Nobody brought anything forward. So, I get that, but I I don't think we heard a better solution, so.
Can if I can add
Yeah.
one comment, Steve Foster, who you met early in the session, our president for next year, he said, he looked at the sunset and goes, 3 years, how much are you gonna count? He goes, it should be 10 years, that it's gonna, take that long to really ramp up the development process.
Mhm.
I think, your concept is, it gives us an
Right.
opportunity to revisit it. Is-
Next
is-
year,
is
yeah,
very-
exactly. I mean,
Right.
right.
3 years.
So
Is it-
long
well,
as that occurs,
but I do want to say, I don't think we're gonna wait 3 years to revisit this. If next year people say, we tried to do some of these things and we haven't gotten anywhere, that we can look at this every year and we plan to.
Yeah, and I think also I'm really putting a lot of weight on what DHCD is doing with this review of designated areas and the streamlining of them and I would hope that would be interplay with some of the recommendations for what might be possible and what would be green lighted in those designated areas once we have streamlined them. So I'm hopeful that will be work we do next year, and we may enable more, I would hope, next year once we're clear on what those areas are and what they want to do with.
Well, before, it doesn't do any good to green light if there's no space to build on.
Okay.
That's what we need to know.
Yeah.
How,
And JFO's coming at 10:15 to try and help us with
okay,
our housing inventory and what questions we need to start answering. Who can help us answer those? That's part of what they're doing us to do. Does anyone else want to be?
I just think the shortness of time that we're talking about for these suspense dates of 26 adds a degree of uncertainty. And if I were a developer, I would be very uncomfortable looking at this kind of bill going forward, knowing that the likelihood that everything is going to change because we're going to constantly be revisiting the same thing. Nobody plans like that.
Okay. Anyone else want to be? Karen?
Thank you, and thank you, committee, for taking as much time as you have on this issue.
Will you identify yourself?
Karen Horn with the League of Cities and Towns. I know that it's been a really difficult process. Needless to say, we don't think that the amendments go far enough for us. We think we actually need to have the 25 units. I did just send the committee an email regarding the master permit process. The guidance at the Act 50 is 16 pages long. It was last updated in 1999. The two entities that I can find that applied for master permit were Stratton and Killington. And I gave you a link to a decision, which I might have editorialized about, excuse me, for Stratton's proposal for some housing. But it's fine to have that in the bill. I really doubt that towns are going to use it.
I do too. I will say that out loud. I mean, I don't put much weight on that unless maybe in the coming years we gave a municipality like
If there was a
pilot grant and said, can you help us see if this becomes useful? But the more owners of property involved in it, the less likely it is. I feel like you could come up with a master.
I think also just one other comment regarding that is, I think the towns that have done the designation process feel like they've done that work already.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And I'm not clear how the master plan is different from your town plan. I mean, if you have it, anyway, that's another conversation.
And
Anyway.
Thank you. Andrew Brewer with Downs Macklemore and Martin, representing the Home Builders Association. I could comment on all day long, but I won't. I'll just focus on Senator Cummings' comment about seeing a map. And I think you, Senator, referenced a map that showed a bunch of dots on it. Or somebody said that.
Well,
And-
yeah, I mean,
And that is what the
we
map
can
is.
zoom in.
It's
Yeah,
a map with dots.
right.
And those are, I will send you a link. It's hard to show because this is an ACCD
Yeah.
atlas
Well,
where
our-
you toggle all
Yeah.
of the designated areas. That's all of them. All of them.
Yeah.
We have a better map.
John
Yeah,
Adams did a better
okay.
job.
That
They
was
also-
so-
they also put
And
municipal water and
the
sewer
point
over
is,
it.
Yeah.
what Senator Cummings is saying is that we're limiting ourselves to postage stamp size area to
Right,
be able to develop with the 10 to 25 rule.
right. For now, and I will say, I think that was the compromise with the committee that, has not necessarily
Got it.
shared jurisdiction with us for a long time on this issue, and we're gonna be working on that, but I appreciate that.
Mhm.
We will have a map then I think people will see where we aren't developing, and people have a lot of different feelings about.
So we have a map which we're gonna ask John, that's on our website, that we can ask John Adams to overlay some of the some of the opportunities that we have created in this bill, because there are still a lot of opportunities, and we hope.
But I guess that's it, where, because we still got like prime ag soil and, you know, steep grades, which is a lot of towns. You can't be in the floodplain. So if you're a town and you're on the plain, half of downtown Barry's in the floodplain, can't build. It's built, but so you know, how much space is available to put housing on? That's what I'm still struggling with.
Yeah, you're all wrong.
Yeah.
Senator Harris.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask if you could speak to the time and the schedule, some of Senator Brock's concerns. that would be
Senator
helpful.
Brock's concerns, if I'm a developer, and it takes, you know, from conception to paint being dry, it takes a lot of time. So if I'm, you know, if this bill were to pass with the 3-year sunset, if I want to start today, because I'm looking at it going, well, what happens if I start 2 years from now in my project? Am I gonna bump up, and I understand you noodle around with language with projects that may already be in, but
If they're in the application process, they're okay.
well, what does that mean, Senator? I understand we have to put some, what does that
Yeah,
mean? I mean, how much money
It
does
means
the
you
developer have
applied,
to
if you've applied,
spend
you apply.
before there's a point of no return? I mean, it's, yeah.
Okay, so Megan, I think I saw your, yeah.
Yeah, Megan Sullivan, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. There's a lot going on, so I'm trying to remember what it is that I was thinking. You know, I think of a few of our members that have come in. So Gary Scott, and when I'm looking at this bill, I'm thinking, will Gary Scott's family be able to move to Vermont from Texas?
This is the VP of
This is
UVM
the,
Medical.
yeah, the facilities manager for UVM Medical Center who testified before the committee. Will his family finally be able to move to Vermont? Will we be able to say Gary Scott is a permanent resident of Vermont? And you know, I think to Senator Cummings' point of, are we enabling housing for middle income earners who are trying to move to Vermont? And we've been working on a survey where businesses have told us this is how many people we've lost, whether current employees or people we've offered positions to that can't come, that are those middle income earners to say, can we move to Vermont? And the numbers are staggering of how many people are not able to move to Vermont, and it's specific to housing. And so if we're looking at, you know, where have we already built infrastructure and saying, well, we built the infrastructure there, but we're not going to put more housing there. We're going to keep it just to these areas. I think we also, you know, think about the question of equity. If we're saying, if we really need, as Kevin Chu talked about, we need more diverse population to come to Vermont. Are we saying you can come to Vermont and we're going to let you live where we put infrastructure, or you're going to come to Vermont and you can just live in our downtowns? So those are.
I mean, I do think the density along municipal water and sewer is one of the critical pieces of the bill, because that won't change things overnight, but it, you know, in my estimation, it'll probably also bring the price of housing down, because if you're in South Burlington, you're not buying a home for less than $750,000.
Right. I think some the Senator Brock's questions too is, and it may just be, I don't know as much about the jurisdictional opinion, so if there's other people who have more knowledge, but Evan Langfield talked about every permitting cost, and that's, I think, posted somewhere, of here's every permit, how much it costs and how much it adds to every unit. And part of that is the preparation. It's not so much the time that it might take to get a decision, but you have to hire a slew of professionals and lawyers to get ready to do this. So if you have, what is the cost and time, not only after you apply for a jurisdictional opinion, but what added cost in doing that jurisdictional opinion, the time and the cost does that add? Because then again, we're talking about, now we're making that cost per unit higher.
That we can continue to answer throughout the session for our own benefit, what a jurisdictional opinion looks like, but it's not a, are you good to pass Act 250 or not opinion? It's a, do we have jurisdiction at this moment, which is, you know, a different
Familiar with,
question.
so that's the
Senator.
I guess, you know, Megan talked about a 750, if that's what you pay.
Yeah.
I love this thing. My house has appreciated 2,000%, and I haven't done anything but basic upgrades. I mean, basic, you know, it's the same house. I could let it sit there and rot, and it would still be worth it. I showed you the picture of my daughter's $300,000 house, which when we were looking for her at around 200,000 5 years ago, was the only thing we could find that had floors that didn't fall through. And we looked for quite a while. That's appreciated. If we don't supply the demand for single family housing, and if we say the only thing you can get is 1/5 of an acre downtown, my house is going to keep getting more valuable. But the young professionals who don't want to live compact downtown, you can come and hike and ski in Vermont and live in New Hampshire and have a really nice house. And it's a really short drive. I mean, we're dealing with all kinds of market forces, and I don't know that anyone is stepping back and really looking at it. The young professionals will not stay if the only place they can get is an apartment or a duplex in downtown, because that's not, maybe they will, maybe it's changed.
I have a son who'd love to have a duplex in
So,
downtown.
I just want to say at 9:15, we'll have been at this for an hour. I'd like to call it to question by then, so I'm gonna go to Senator Clarkson and.
I would just say, we're responding to market forces that have put huge pressure on our long-term housing opportunities for our Vermonters. I'm sorry, the private sector is benefiting from short-term rentals, from seasonal houses being sold left, right, and center, and from our COVID refugees who have bought houses at an unprecedented rent and have taken them off the market for our long-term full-time residents. It is, we can't have it both ways, guys. You know, we have a housing crisis. We helped encourage that in lots of ways. COVID has exacerbated that, short-term rentals have. So we have lots of market forces. To go to Ann's point, we have a lot of market forces playing here, but we've taken a lot of things that would have normally been available for full-time Vermonters off the table, which is really a challenge, and we're trying to address it. But this is a private, a private market tension with where we are, and I think we're trying to respond to the market forces, but we have to acknowledge it's not, you know, this has been a problem that's been building for a while, and here is our attempts to really to build more housing. Some of it is low-hanging fruit, and we have a lot of money in this bill investing in some of the low-hanging fruit to keep to house more people and to house our homeless, and to address mixed income, middle income housing, mixed income down to our most needy Vermonters. So I think actually there's lots of great stuff in here. It's one step, it's not a be-all. It's not the answer to everything, but it's a step in the right direction, and the House will be working on it for another 8 weeks. So I would encourage us to move this as it is so that we can continue working on this important bill.
I'll let Katie speak, because I do think we're really trying to balance these questions about new generations, you know, environment, downtowns. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Katie Gallagher with the Vermont Natural Resources Council. And I just want to echo, well, first of all, appreciate the work of the whole committee to balance a lot of this. I know it's a lot. I work for an environmental organization. I've also worked on housing. I'm on my local housing committee, and it's a struggle.
Yeah.
But to echo Senator Clarkson on both, earlier you talked about the studies, and I think it's just important. I really appreciated the thoughts about how we measure our success.
Yeah.
Because we're not really able to do that right now. And even I used houseneither.org, like I spent way too much time in there. It's amazing.
But it's also really difficult at the town level to get that kind of granular level data. So there's still a lot of information that we're missing. And that's where the legislature came to last year in saying, we need these reports from the Natural Resources Board and from the Department of Housing and Community Development so that we can actually have some more information to move these problems that we're still discussing right now forward. So recognizing that yes, we should be having more towns that are applying for designations. They're not right now because those designations have some shortcomings. So we need to address that. Same with Act 250. The process takes a long time. The appeal process is challenging. That's what we're trying to address through the study. So I think that this bill does a really good job. And from the zoning perspective, housing is not a new challenge for a lot of Vermont. There have been housing committees and towns that have been working on this for decades. And I'll say in my experience, zoning has come last, which this bill is starting to address because there's been an effort to keep things the way that they are. And let's try to, to address housing here and there. And so I think that this bill does do a lot in just, I think it's hard to really conceptualize, but we haven't allowed duplexes and, some of those things in town center. So it's a small, but also huge step forward.
Thanks, Katie. So
Haven't we allowed duplexes? Or is it just the towns haven't wanted to build?
I can even tell you in Burlington, you cannot have a duplex unless you have more than 10,000 square feet of property. That's even in Burlington.
But that's the Burlington zone.
Well, yes, but now
What
this
I'm
will
asking is,
supersede all of that.
does the state, in Katie's town, I don't know that the state says you can't build a duplex. It's a local.
But we are now saying nobody can stand in the way of duplexing, not the town, not the state.
Right.
Yeah.
That's fine, but that's not the state's problem. If I don't want to do duplexing, I'm going to give up my designation.
That's not tied to it.
Yeah, it's by right.
It's by right.
Yes.
Yep.
Then we get back to the equality.
Okay.
This.
So this will not end, and that's okay. This is an ongoing conversation, and I think when we look back, we'll have taken a really historic step to promote multifamily housing, to invest another potential $100 million in workforce housing and housing that middle-income Vermonters can move into in shorter order because we've got some barriers out of the way. And we have done that while balancing the concerns that many Vermonters have that we do it in a way that makes us look different than the rest of the country. So I'm going to call it to question and ask for a motion. I think when we go to the floor, we can all be in slightly different places, but I'm really proud of our work. And I think Vermonters will be really proud of our work as well.
I would move that Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs vote out draft 1.1. Well, accept the amendment. What is our
So
motion?
you don't need a formal motion. You're going to straw poll on
Straw poll, thank
the
you.
Senate Natural.
On the Senate
Whether or
Natural
not we
Element.
should
On the report,
The substitute report from Senate Natural.
Okay, that we would act favorably on the substitute report draft 1.1 of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee.
so I'm going to ask that all those in the straw poll in favor of the substitute report, please say aye.
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 You say aye with great reluctance.
We can.
I'm saying it with some reluctance.
That's on the record.
Yeah.
We have
There
many
will be-
votes.
There is substantial reluctance.
I really.
This hasn't helped us very much at all, and it just impeded what we did. I think what we did in the bill that we passed was, we made great progress, and I think this sets it back.
I think you speak for others, and I appreciate with great reluctance you accepting this, and
I'm also with reluctance.
okay, that's a new category then. I with reluctance.
Progress. Are we keeping track of how much housing we're building?
We're gonna have JFO in, but
We need to.
We're gonna have
We
to
have to
info
keep
in
track.
at,
We must.
The rental registry would have helped
for
us.
10:15. So
Just saying.
let's
I'm-
revisit that conversation at 10:15. Tucker's been very patient and we're switching topics. I'd like just to keep us
I
moving.
have to take my firefighter amendment up
Okay.
to,
Okay.
oh, we should discuss it.
Probably.
Yeah.
The other committee,
Okay.
could we just take a brief second? Because this is the amendment that Sears and I have crafted, that Damien crafted just quickly. I had to take it up to Bloomer. I
Okay.
didn't realize I had to
Okay.
do that.
It's pretty fast, I imagine.
Yeah, no, it's pretty fast. It just includes in the study an ability for them to also revisit the requirements, that it just be smoking, that we look at other things that may affect cancers and may cause cancers.
And the age, does it
And
talk
the
about the
age,
age?
yeah.
Okay,
And the
good.
So those are the two things that address.
And we could get it up there and also talk to Mike DeRocher more about it. He's coming in for 15 minutes at 10 a.m.
Right.
Do
Is
we
he coming
have
to
a
talk about the
better
amendment?
answer for what the cancer screening is?
Yes.
I
So we-
thought they were talking about some guy
So-
with an MRI machine. You talked
No,
about
that
a
was the
blood
second.
test.
So the reason I didn't answer it was that I knew that there was more than one. So it's the pre-screenings are an ultrasound option or a blood test option. And they're up to $300. That's one of the things they're exploring, is how are we going to finance that, and what is appropriate to require or not. We have made in the bill permissible language for departments to choose to do this or not, and so they can do it, and we hope they will do it. Anyway, that's what this is.
Yeah.
Do I have support from the committee? Can I say this is a
Yes,
Friendly, friendly.
friendly amendment?
Thank you.
We support it. Okay, I gotta just run it
Okay,
out.
thank you.
no reservation.
Tucker.
I want a reservation.
Hi. I hope you got some rest for a second or something. Awesome with this time. We are switching gears because we have a lot to do post crossover. And one of the things I want us to understand, because it will be probably an ongoing conversation for most of the second half of the session before we vote, is sports betting. And did the House vote on this yet or no?
Good morning, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Council. H127, which is the House companion bill to S105, is on the floor this afternoon.
Okay.
So it has been amended by 3 different committees on the House side and is coming up for second reading probably late this evening, I would guess, based on where it is on the calendar.
Okay.
So if they voted down, are we then gonna try and, we can't send them an S bill? They
We can-
voted down.
We can
instead,
cross that
right?
bridge when we get to it, but 3 committees have worked on it, and I think I was accused of saying it might get derailed. I was just saying it could still get derailed in the House because this issue has been derailed in the past, but I think the speaker taking it to the floor is confident that the votes are there after the work of 3 different committees. So it's something we will need to consider and should start considering earlier than later.
So how would you like me to proceed this morning? Would
So
like
you
to
have
know-
our bill.
Yes.
I suppose it's helpful, especially for some new to the issue, to walk through the concept. And I don't know if there's been substantial changes on the House side, if any of this becomes irrelevant or just tweaked.
For the most part, it's been tweaked.
Okay, okay.
The House Government Operations Committee's report is slightly different in a number of ways from S105, including some new guardrails around responsible gaming and problem gambling. Most of the changes that have happened on the House side are actually around how money moves around from DLL and problem gambling services provided by the Department of Mental Health, and then of course the general fund, near and dear to our
And
hearts.
we can consider those, but they'll ultimately be finance and appropriations questions. It sounds like.
Right.
And I want people to know S105 and H127 started as the same exact bill, relatively.
That's correct.
Yeah.
They started substantially the exact same bill, maybe with some technical corrections made because one was introduced after the other. So we had an opportunity to do a more thorough reading of the 30 pages in the bill. For the most part, you can summarize both of the bills as they were introduced as putting into place the recommendations of the Sports Betting Study Committee. And primarily those recommendations were, first, to establish a regulated sports wagering market through the Department of Liquor and Lottery. And there are essentially, we can break down into two major models in the legalized sports betting states. The most common model is the license model. You might call it, for most of the states, a casino model, where the casinos contract with sports wagering operators, or operators get licenses directly through what's known as a master licensee, which would be a casino. And the state just has an open regulated market. Then there's a minority of states, most of whom are in the Northeast and consist of our neighbors, that operate more of a state control model, where the privilege to offer sports wagering is acquired directly through the state, who acts as the primary, for lack of a better term, licensee. So that would be New Hampshire, New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Massachusetts is our lone neighbor that operates a license model.
Do license, can I ask a quick question? Yeah. Do license models always have casinos?
For the most part, yes.
Okay.
These are all great questions that, I mean, and I'm not gonna speak for Senator Brock, but the three of us who've been on this committee recently have a lot of background knowledge, but I think, you know, if you're new to this topic, it's fair to ask a lot of questions.
Now, that may just be because many states have casinos, and what states, for the most part, have done is leverage the resources they already have in place. They added sports wagering into their gambling systems. And in those states that have casinos, the casino is already kind of the chief licensee in the state. So if you're going to add this new category of wagering, legalize it, it makes sense both from an efficiency standpoint and for the regulatory relationship between the state and these licensees to use the resources you have.
Because it already exists.
Because it already exists. New York is an interesting combination of both. New York has casinos. They went through a state control model. And one of the things that they require is that all of their operators, so these are the platforms that actually, you know, construct the apps and offer the wagering, have to base their servers in the casinos that exist in the state.
Oh, the actual physical servers? Oh, that's interesting.
And they have to pay a fee.
Okay.
And it's a not insubstantial fee that goes directly to support the casinos.
And then some casinos are on tribal lands, and I don't know if those are.
That is
Do
very
we have
true.
those lands here in this state?
We have some forests that are set aside as like tribally run,
I
but
think it's
nothing
like
close
3
to.
acres.
Yeah.
We did tax exemption. We don't have, and that was a real concern with recognizing the Abenaki.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that. I'm
And
just-
only
I'm
federal
One of our-
just familiar
Several of
with
our governors did not
Yeah.
want casinos,
Right,
but whatever, we never
yeah,
bought or ceded or had a treaty
right,
with, that we then took the land, we ceded in the treaty.
right.
So there is no tribal
Right.
land, so there is no non-state tax cigarettes and there are no
Yeah.
casinos.
It's a good question, because this
Yeah.
has so much to do with gambling, which is
Fishing
a big
licenses.
topic for us.
Yeah.
Federal recognition is extremely high bar that some tribes lose more than gain. And we do not have any federally recognized tribes right now who have any land claims in the state. The Iroquois and the Mohican are the closest and sometimes have tried to make claims to territory in Vermont, but it's
Okay.
highly unlikely that we would have sovereign territory in
Okay.
Vermont in the near future.
Love that you're asking the question
Yes.
because it also helps illustrate the kind of complicated landscape that has developed around this type of wagering specifically. Now, the reason that you have essentially this relationship between tribal lands and types of gambling is that there was a federal law, still exists, still controls a lot of gambling, called the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, which gave permission and exemptions from certain gambling restrictions in federal law to tribal territories to essentially develop gaming operations through compacts with the state. Connecticut, also in our region, another state control model, splits authority to offer sports wagering between its tribal compacts with 2 casino locations and the state lottery.
Okay.
And in the past, this committee has seen maps, and it's, there are 34 states is the way that it's often looked. 34 states where sports wagering is legal, and they'll show a map and the state will be lit up, right? The entire state is highlighted. You can sports wager here. But for, let's say, somewhere between 5 to 10 of those states, the truth is you can probably only sports wager in about 25 square miles within that state. For example, South Dakota, it'll be lit up on the map, but it's only the city of Deadwood, or at least it was only the city of Deadwood for a period of time where you could sports wager, and you had to be physically located within an establishment that was authorized to provide it. So what's proposed in Vermont? Well, first, no retail wagering. So the bill doesn't contemplate going to a location, meeting with a teller, buying a ticket and placing your wager. It contemplates statewide mobile wagering, access through the internet. So that would be a computer or mobile device primarily. It contemplates having the Department of Liquor and Lottery be the primary offerer of sports wagering. And DLL would be conducting this through contract with sports wagering operators. So the companies that actually.
This is solely internet by individuals, as opposed to, for example, no machines such as those that sell lottery tickets now. Those kinds of operations would not be included. Is that correct?
That is correct. The Sports Betting Study Committee did suggest, it wasn't a formal recommendation, it was a suggestion that the General Assembly study the feasibility, financial feasibility of retail wagering through kiosks or through retail locations, but that didn't make it into H127. It's not in S1. And there's a lot of skepticism that Vermont would actually be able to carry retail operations. Because it might be difficult to actually research and find locations where people would travel to go place their wagers rather than doing it over their phone.
But there are kiosks in other states, for example.
Yes.
That do that. So the model exists.
The model is there. There are quite a few states with kiosks. Connecticut would be one. New Hampshire has a very successful retail wagering program. And Delaware's primary form of wagering is kiosks and what they call their racinos, which are their combined racetrack casino locations.
We don't have racetracks.
I like the racetracks.
Not anymore.
Tunbridge Fair.
Yeah.
Tunbridge Fair.
Motor vehicle racetracks or dog racing?
Yes.
We had some motor vehicle racing.
See, isn't this fun?
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Portfolio. But we do not have, you have to go to.
We still have a racing commission. We did for a long time after the racetrack was closed.
That's right. We
Good,
did.
easy job.
It is a scandal.
So the way that both S105 and H127 are structured is that the Department of Liquor and Lottery would be tasked with finding 2 to 6, a minimum of 2, a maximum of 6 operators to offer sports wagering within the state. That was the recommendation of the Sports Betting Study Committee. This will be done through a competitive bidding process. There are structures in place in both bills to require certain information to be submitted by applicants during the competitive bid process. There's an escape clause in both bills for the Department of Liquor and Lottery. H127 is a bit different in that respect, but S105 would allow DLL to contract with one operator if there were not sufficient qualified applicants through the competitive bid process. So if they get one qualified applicant, but they get a bunch of bids from companies that don't pass, I guess we'll call it the ethical or integrity sniff test, then they don't have to admit a company that doesn't meet any of the standards under the bid just because the law requires 2 operators. So DLL has some discretion to go to 1 in this bill, and in H127, the House added the additional option that if they don't get anything that passes their standards, they can say 0 operators are being admitted and we're going to restart. The Department of Liquor and Lottery in both bills is given some rulemaking authority. Specifically, they are given the authority to adopt procedures under the Administrative Procedures Act. Procedures are different from rules. There are different requirements under the APA. For the most part, the Administrative Procedures Act, with respect to procedures, does not require the same sort of public hearings or public input, and it doesn't require submission to the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. Procedures under the APA are directed internally to guide the agency in its conduct of its affairs, and it is expressly stated that procedures do not have the force of law. So what both S105 and H127 does is it allows procedures to be used for governing the sports wagering market, and in particular the contracts between DLL and the operators, but it requires 30 days notice both to the public and to the operators, 2 public hearings, and the publication of the final proposed procedure for public input before it is formally adopted by the department and put into place. Background, state lottery operates in almost the exact same way, but with none of the procedural safeguards. There's an exemption from the Administrative Procedures Act for lottery rules, so that the department can adopt procedures to comply with, for example, the interstate compacts that govern the state lottery without having to go through formal rulemaking. So this is similar to that. If at any
Well,
point,
that's a big deal.
This was a recommend, this
Obviously.
was like a topic for this task, or what was it called, the study committee?
The task force.
study,
Yeah, let's talk about that.
I just want to keep it consistent.
You were on it.
Yes,
You two were on it, right?
no, Sears and
Sears.
I and Carol Odie and Matt Byron from the House, and then a bunch of administrative people, and Wendy Knight shared it. What was I gonna say? Oh, yeah,
So
so
the rules exemption.
I don't know, I would call it was
Or-
exemption, but sort of
Well,
rulemaking authority. We want them to have flexibility outside of session and outside of our process, because it's a very evolving market. Other states are bringing their sports betting operations online right around us and evolving their own. So we did, and we can find the piece of the report, but we did err on the side of giving them more flexibility in this area that we could take away in the future, but
Can I
it was a
okay.
discussion, yeah.
So the exemption that exists already, that's helpful to know. So this isn't a new model. There's already, I mean, I'm calling it an exemption. I should call it something else.
right, the special procedures.
Special
rules.
procedures, okay,
Right,
cool.
right. So
So do we, and those are so that they can adapt to federal law is what I heard.
And so I wouldn't call it an exemption, but I'd call it the exception here. All agencies are allowed to adopt procedures without going through formal rulemaking. And recall that procedures are internally directed. The state lottery has the exception that they have the force of law with the procedures they adopt for the state lottery. And the same language is put here, that the procedures adopted by the Department for Sports Wagering will have the force of law.
Are those procedures still publicly known?
Yes.
Okay, so the process doesn't go through the typical public process,
6 days.
but the result of that process is publicly known and
Yes.
public record.
And the deliberation during the process is known.
Yeah, and there are a few agencies that have similar procedural authority. The Department of Corrections is definitely one that has that. Now, the background that the chair gave a moment ago about regulatory flexibility in this space, some of that has to do with how the market evolves. Some of that has to do with the fact that this is almost purely technologically based. So what you're regulating is building off of itself and developing at a rapid pace. It's difficult for regulatory agencies to adapt to, because the standards that you might put in place, for example, for cybersecurity, 1 month might be completely different the next month.
Sure.
It's the same for the kind of market and accounting control standards, right? As businesses start to change around some of those accounting controls, what are known as minimum internal control standards, there are these national organizations that are constantly publishing and developing new standards to try to make sure that there isn't any issues with integrity around wagering systems.
Sure.
So
When we-
Yeah,
When we take more testimony, we can hear from the cybersecurity company that we contract with. I think they have a contract with at least 49 states. And they're second by second monitoring illegal attempts to log in, patterns of behavior, et cetera. So we can just illustrate what Tucker's talking about, that it's really highly.
Oh, I'm sure.
Flux.
But that also makes it challenging for the public to understand what's happening. And so like, right, well,
You can, oh yeah, you can get it.
I'm trying to
We'll
get
just take
the,
breaks.
okay, I'll,
the big
that's enough
picture
questions for now.
issues,
Yeah.
just in
Right.
case something significant does happen before the House bill comes over.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I assume that you'll want a thorough walkthrough
Yeah.
of H127 if and when it
Yeah,
comes
I was
over.
gonna-
Right, absolutely. This is conceptual, especially for our new members.
Oh, okay, so we're just sort of doing the framework on sports betting.
Kind of
because
walking
in
through,
prep for what's coming
Yeah.
up.
especially what Tucker's doing a great job of is the major decisions the study committee made that have formed the parameters that are largely intact.
Yes.
So we're waiting for the House bill,
Which is this
It's
afternoon.
being done
Evening.
today.
and
Yeah.
then
They're
the House
voting
bill
on
then will come to us. We will not act on this. Obviously, we'll not act on
Oh,
this.
yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna act
And
on
we'll give it
H127.
plenty of time this
Yeah,
session,
yeah,
but the
that's
earlier
fine.
that, people are hearing about it, especially if you're new
Yeah.
to this, it's like, good to know what's happening.
Big picture pieces around the market itself. I believe that in this bill, the age requirement is 18. The House bill increased that to 21.
Yeah.
I think we all knew that was gonna change, and we just started with 18 because no one had particularly strong feelings about 21.
Right, and 18 is also the age to participate in fantasy sports contests currently, which are legal,
Right,
and in the state lottery.
right, and sorry, it's H127, is that right?
Yes, that is correct, H127. There's a government operations report, which is the bill, and then 2 other committee amendments. As far
Can you
as
remind us which committees? It was Ways and Means
and
and
appropriations.
Appropriations. Okay, great, yep, got it.
So as far as who can play, almost anyone can play. There's a short list of prohibited players, which includes, for example, directors and staff of the Department of Lottery, players, referees, umpires, coaches, training staff who might have a competitive advantage. They're not allowed to wager, for example, on sports that they're involved in. The operators and their staff and employees, because they would also have a competitive advantage because they are, for example, the mathematicians that are going through and developing the odds and lines that are being sold to the public. Then as well, the types of events that can be wagered on, something to keep in mind because there are policy and institutional choices being made there. The bill, both S105 and H127, as it was recommended by House Government Operations, excludes Vermont college sports from sports wagering, with the exception that wagering on tournament games is permitted.
Good. So there's,
High school sports are also excluded.
we had done that, right?
Club teams.
H127.
Sorry.
H127 includes racing, including horse racing, and it includes equestrian events.
So like New England horse shows, kind of thing.
Yes,
Polo
They-
matches.
polo matches. There's some sort of horse dancing that I saw in the Olympics this year. The horse.
Dressage or actual dancing?
We.
Can you bet on the Olympics?
Yes.
sadly.
Yes,
Oh, really?
sport or athletic event. Now,
In England,
there,
if it moves, it can be better.
one of the prohibited events would be any event where a majority of the individuals who are participating in the athletic event are under 18 years of age.
Oh, okay.
The Department of Liquor and Lottery is given authority to approve the categories of sporting events that are allowed to be bet on within the statutory constructs here. So that would be an area where the department would have to actually approve that category of sporting event before it goes live. There's an area of ambiguity that you should be aware of. The House didn't directly address it, but whether e-gaming is included here.
So like video, like when
Which is
people play
huge.
a video game.
Right.
I'm out of my league already, but like they play live.
Oh, that's their job.
What about like,
I mean, they do
what
it.
about like poker? Like, is that e-gaming?
I think you're betting yourself on.
Yeah, but can't you bet on like a professional?
Oh, bet on a better.
Poker.
Interesting.
So
Like
the
cumulative.
definition of sports event, both here and in the House bill, is that sports events are events in which 2 or more persons participate in a sports or athletic event.
Wrestling. So, but what is e-gaming then? Because if you're just sitting there like playing on a,
The
Controller.
open question would be whether it qualifies as a sports or athletic event. In other states, if e-gaming is supposed to be allowed, there is an express call out for e-gaming.
Here it's silent.
It's silent.
okay. So we'll have to get more information. Did they take a lot of testimony on that, decided to be silent, or it just came up?
None that I heard.
I don't know if I have been thinking at all on that, but, okay. It's not a sport, I guess that's my opinion.
Well,
So,
careful. Some
we-
people think.
There are tons of things that aren't sports that people bet on all the time.
Right, but this is a sports wagering.
I know, but what people consider a sport is also.
They could bet
amusing.
on if we're gonna pass a bill or not, you know.
Right, exactly,
Sport.
exactly. I bet bookies are taking bets right now.
There's a New Zealand-based company that I believe offers in the United States and certain jurisdictions wagering on the outcomes of political
Yeah.
contests.
So
Okay.
there's odds published every
Elections,
year,
yeah.
yeah.
Right,
Um,
and it is part of the reason we're doing this bill at all is to bring in the illicit market and to regulate it and to raise revenue. So it is a question worth answering if there's a big market for it.
We moved from the discussion of regulatory flexibility through what is the market, what are you allowed to bet on? And the dovetail between those is the authority that I touched upon. The department can approve categories of wagers and types of wagers before they're offered to the public. And there's also a way, it's built into this bill, for the sports governing bodies. So for example, the NFL, the NCAA, whichever organization you hold near and dear to your heart, make sure that in your mind.
If I may.
They can reach out to the Department of Liquor and Lottery and request that wagering be restricted with respect to a particular event, which moves into another big piece of the bill, integrity monitoring and the requirement for the department to pay attention to the integrity of both the sporting events and the integrity of the wagering market. And that's an enormous duty for the regulatory agencies in every state that has legal sports wagering. And that's one of the mechanisms built into this bill that allows the department to kind of monitor what's happening with particular events. The department's also allowed to participate in international and national integrity monitoring associations where data is shared between states so that they can pick up, for example, when there's some sort of entity that is bundling wagers in each of the states on a particular event, potentially to try to influence the outcome either of the odds that are being offered and the wagers that are available, or because they know that they've already exerted some sort of influence over the sports contest. And the commissioner from New Hampshire has testified both from the Sports Betting Study Committee and in front of the House Committee about some of the work they've had to do with integrity monitoring around more vulnerable events. And some of the events that you pointed to specifically were e-gaming, where there's apparently more opportunity for influence.
And so what stops me sitting here with my phone from wagering in New Hampshire?
You lack physical presence.
Yeah.
Who knows that? Or could I just drive over the line? I just need to get near a tower, right, in New Hampshire. So if I live in St. Johnsbury, how,
Senator, you're gonna have an excellent time if you hear from the geofencing companies that will come in. They can identify your physical presence with your phone within feet of a border, and they actually leave a protective buffer from the state border so that you have to,
okay.
they can be very certain that you've crossed, much to the chagrin
But we
of
get-
people living in New Hampshire who
We
live
get
on the border.
really scared about the police being able to do that. But now you tell me that there is a private business who can track my phone within feet.
There
Well,
are
you're,
many.
yeah.
There are many. when
And
you
they
use
sell
the
their
application.
information
Right.
to
Well, I
others.
know they sell every time I try and buy something.
Yeah.
We may get a data privacy bill from the House, but for now, this is a transaction you're trying to engage in, so
Right.
you're in
And
some
the
way. getting
portal
permission.
is an application, so you actually have to go through the application
Right.
before you can place the wager. You open that application, it does an immediate geo data pull from your phone. It says Senator is now within 15 feet of the New Hampshire border and therefore is
Right,
a legal wagerer under that system.
and our monitoring company could tell us that there was something like 18,000 unique failed login attempts in Vermont to access sports wagering.
They know what you're thinking also.
Soon.
I'm glad they do, because I don't.
They probably should have a better handle on our patterns of thinking.
Okay.
So moving through some of this, the competitive bidding process essentially requires quite a bit of information under both bills constructs, but primarily what the department is going to be tasked with looking for under the bills is what is the expected revenue of the applicant? How much of that revenue are they planning to give, or will they agree to give the state? Under the House Ways and Means Amendment under H-127, that has to be a minimum of 20%. What other states with the competitive bidding process, specifically New Hampshire and New York, have seen is 51%. I'm not certain, and JFO will be able to tell you what some of those expected bids could be in Vermont based on the population. They also look for example, the advertising and marketing plans of the applicant. One of the questions that they have to ask is, what is your plan to convert the illegal market to a legal market? How are you going to get people to stop using the myoffshorebookie.net account and use whatever the state's
So I can
account
use
is?
my bookie option. I figure that anyone that wants to gamble online has found a way to do it.
Right.
Oh,
That's
indeed.
through illegal means,
Right.
and it is
I was gonna
currently.
say,
And
hopefully
one-
not the chair of Senate Finance.
So that-
But I think one of the reasons we're doing this is actually you're very unprotected when you do it currently with that. And now this will add protections for Vermonters who are doing it. Is that, I mean, that's a pretty broad stroke, but I mean, it does add a huge number of protections. You could lose everything. There are no, I mean, this provides some safety nets. for
Whenever
Vermont.
you gamble, you can lose it.
No, but you can have won and not get those proceeds.
Right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you guys.
I don't use my offshorebookie.net, but.
No, but isn't that
So this is a
correct?
regulated market.
That you could win and not ever get paid.
That is the
That's-
testimony that has been
yes.
brought to specifically
sure.
this committee many times.
Yes.
A piece of testimony
even
that I
remember
point to pretty frequently is that, pretty sure the individual's name was Kip Levin. And at the time, was the CEO of DraftKings and came in and provided information on how many Vermonters were using illegal sports books. And
Lot.
the fact that if you try to withdraw your funds, even the money that you put into the account, not just the money you've won, you perhaps can't. Or you're compelled to use some sort of very unofficial digital currency, which, yes.
We don't have to choose currency.
So,
We do.
the primary way that revenue is going to be gathered by the state is going to be through the revenue share in the contract. That's what this construct does. The department acts as an enterprise partner in marketing and selling this to the public, and then gets a share.
And does the department decide what they're going to sell and what kind of deal they're going to enter into vis-a-vis the share? There's nothing specified from state standpoint that there shall be a share, that shall be a minimum of such and such or something like that. What is there?
The House Ways and Means Amendment sets that minimum at 20%. So the department.
20%.
Right.
And you mentioned that 20% is substantially lower than what you're seeing in some other states.
Yes, but again, there's some volatility to what the state might expect these applicants to actually bid. What I'll note is that New Hampshire, they have a 51% revenue share, but they got that bid from one operator. So they have a monopoly that they've offered in the state. If you look at the bid materials from New Hampshire, as soon as the number went up from 1 to 2 or 3 operators, they received bids of 22, 21, and eventually 13 or 9%, depending on the number of operators in the market space. Because the total handle from the people playing the games is going to diminish for each one of those operators the more you have. New York, massive state for both marketing, much larger than us for population. Many sports franchises, major sports franchises, enormous cities. They have 9 operators, all of whom agreed to the 51% revenue share. Where does that leave Vermont? I couldn't begin to tell you the math going into what happens in a smaller state with a
Are
minimum.
there other smaller states that you've looked at to see whether or not there is a trend in terms of percentage? Are they all at the bottom end?
The majority of states have the lower end. And I think that if you were to look at the national averages, you're going to find that it's somewhere between, let's say, 10 to 15%. Tennessee, larger state, 20%. Rhode Island, small state, 51%, but everything goes through their casinos.
And they have more people.
Just a different culture.
Yeah, and then there are people who travel to casinos.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Rhode Island's pretty accessible.
Connecticut has a lower statutory tax rate, but they also have a state monopoly and a tribal monopoly on offering the wagers. So they have an opportunity to experience more revenue through how they're directly offering, for example, retail wagering at their track locations that the state owns and operates through the Connecticut Lottery Corporation.
And am I correct that the Connecticut Lottery Commissioner was our lottery commissioner?
Or worked for the state lottery or
Yeah.
something.
Worked for the lottery, I think.
And testified in
Makes
front of the
sense.
sports betting study
Yeah.
committee.
Greg. he did.
Greg, he's very
He did.
easy for us to track down, and he keeps a handle on lots of, he knows Vermont's culture very well because he was involved in our system, and if we want more testimony from you.
No. Does Canada allow sports betting?
In certain provinces.
It's part of
Yes.
the Commonwealth, so it'd be hard to imagine.
I'm just thinking with
Ontario.
name, Ontario doesn't help. Okay, so there's no sports betting in Quebec.
There is,
There,
There is.
yes.
Okay, so they aren't gonna be coming down here.
Now, I couldn't begin to
Unless
tell
they're-
you whether it's strictly retail or
No.
Retail.
It's one thing we did not
I'll
have
ask
time
my
to
son
look
where
at.
the sports betting is, but are they only allowing you to bet on Canadian teams? And you might wanna bet on the Super Bowl, might be worth a trip over the border if all you're doing is tracking your phone.
well, many of these apps are going to allow you to bet on international games as well. And, you know, there's no restriction here that this is only US-based sporting events. So I would assume that you'll see both Olympic events or World Cup, really
FIFA.
a lot of FIFA matches.
Yeah.
There's a good organization
Or
for it.
Premier League.
Baseball in South America.
I mean,
Yeah, no.
you'll probably see as many Premier League jerseys in Burlington, Vermont as you see NFL jerseys.
Right.
So I would assume that the department will be approving and offering international wagering as well.
So I'm
Wagering
on,
international games.
such a fun topic for everyone, because.
well, it's certainly different than what we were
We
just
probably have time for
discussing.
like one more. point?
The last point, and this was the last recommendation of the study committee, was to establish some sort of responsible gaming, problem gambling fund, and to have a program operated by the Department of Mental Health to offer problem gambling services to Vermonters. And those services maybe are not direct counseling, but would be things like education, the certification of counselors, funding resources for families affected by problem gambling and gambling addiction. S105, H127 is introduced and is passed by government operations, or recommended by government operations. Both had a special fund where 5% of the revenue of the department from sports wagering, or a minimum of $500,000 annually, would go into this special fund that would then pay for these Department of Mental Health services. And that proposal has been the source of the agita between the committees in the House that will be discussed on the floor today. House Ways and Means instead set a problem gambling program, eliminated the 5%, but not less than 500,000 mechanism, and said 500,000 in future years and 250,000 next year, and made everything come and go from the general fund. House Appropriations has now amended the report from Ways and Means to say, no, neither a special fund or the general fund, instead an enterprise fund that will be operated the same as Liquor Control Enterprise Fund or the state lottery, and we will allow to deficit spend during the first year until both revenue and fees are put into what is now termed the sports wagering fund.
So we've hit the big
That sounds
time
interesting.
here, like this is the issue I think people want to dig into. I want to be respectful of Mike DeRoche's time because, you know, we've asked him to come over here and put 3 studies on his plate.
We like seeing Mike.
And we could go very deep into this issue. So we'll get this probably back on the agenda next week.
We have it on tomorrow because we get swapped tomorrow, so.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Knapp is coming in tomorrow.
And we don't have anything that replaced it tomorrow.
Not-
Okay.
so we can talk more tomorrow.
We can talk more tomorrow, yeah.
We can have
Commissioner
Becker come in,
We could,
Well-
although,
Do we want to absorb what happens at the House
yeah,
today before talking about it more?
we will know more
Yeah.
tomorrow. We will
Probably.
know more tomorrow.
Right.
So,
But it might take time to
But there's a huge amount
digest
of them.
them more.
But that's gonna be on a fairly narrow piece of the bill. There is gonna be a lot of the bill that will not be changed, I don't think.
are you
Exactly.
still planning to come tomorrow?
It's on my calendar, so
Okay.
I can be available.
Okay, I think then you're right, it would still be good to download the actual changes before we go into the.
Yes.
Well, just work
Yeah.
from
Absorb,
27.
download,
Whatever
depending
it
on when
is.
it happens, it might just be a steep, a very
Yeah,
light steep.
Exactly.
Maybe, I think it would be better to work from 127 as passed from.
Starting
approach.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
If you're comfortable with that.
I'm comfortable with that, and I will let you all know if anything happens on the floor that would substantially change
Great.
the current proposals.
I would be surprised if an amendment that's not listed on the calendar by tomorrow somehow changes the entire nature.
Perhaps. We shall see.
We shall see. I don't want to jinx anything. Thanks so much, Tucker. Thanks for your patience.
And thank you for your work on this issue.
Yeah,
Because
you're gonna be done with this?
Wendy, what you
Tucker can't work on
don't know is how long Tucker has been working on this issue.
how many studies we've asked him to do.
He is now the Vermont
Expert.
authority on this. Bye. Oh,
Hello, Mr. Director.
Good morning.
So as, just to get you up to speed, you know, there's one more study that included you that came back as an amendment from Natural Resources, but it does name you quite centrally in that work on renewable energy standards. That is, you know, we did with some reluctance pass that amendment in our committee already. So we now recognize that there are what looks like so far just from our jurisdiction about 3 studies we're aware of that we've asked you to take on, and we want to hear your thoughts. The bill has many more miles to go in the legislative process, and so we did want to hear your thoughts, and we're sorry that the timing is off in terms of
That's fine. For the record, I'm Mike DeRocher, the Executive Director for the Division of Fire Safety. And currently, right now, one of our major priorities based on Act 181 last year was implementing the rental housing health and safety code enforcement, which we are still heavily engaged in, and we haven't launched officially this program yet. And part of that is due to us completing some of the rulemaking process. We were initially the public hearings were waived in the passage of Act 181, and now it has been determined that ICAR, if I recall, wants us to do a public hearing. So we're in the process of scheduling public hearings for the rental housing. So we are buried in that realm right now.
Yeah.
So I can speak to S100 specifically, the amendment here. I think first of all, I want to emphasize we do support a study. Okay. The issues I have with the language in the study is that it's already implying that the Division of Fire Safety.
RVs and CVs.
Oh,
And-
the RV, okay. I
And
was
that's
wondering.
the study that we're talking about, right? It's the RVs and the
Yes, yeah.
It's on
It
page.
asks-
No, I
we
have
should
it in front
anchor
of me,
ourselves
so-
here.
And there's
It's on
another
page
study
10.
in the underlying bill about fire safety and general code compliance.
Right, I didn't know if we're
There's
talking about
the
that
third
one.
Study in the firefighter.
So Mike, are you talking about section 24 now, the Building Energy Code Study Committee?
It's 25 in our latest amendment. So it's
Oh,
on page 11 of the draft 1.1 amendment.
Okay, sorry. Right.
So this, where I have concerns is, I'm going to read the following, and I think it may.
It's this one, right? The section 25 energy code compliance.
Right, yeah. And so there's a section in there, the committee shall consider and recommend strategies to increase awareness of and compliance with the RVs and CVs, including designation of the Division of Fire Safety and the Department of Public Safety as a statewide authority having jurisdiction for administration, interpretation, enforcement in conjunction with DFS existing jurisdiction over the building codes that we have now. So in this summer study language, it's already implying that they're going to designate and do the framework of this study, branding us as the authority having jurisdiction. I would rather see language in there that is broader, where let this summer study group meet and let them have the debate about where this program should sit and what the framework of that program would look like. And the reason I mention that is because the administration obviously has a different view on this, right? They think that this program could be administered through a workforce development type strategy with without having to issue fines, roll government, and come down with a heavy fist on enforcement in order to implement a successful energy efficiency program.
Right, our committee was concerned that everything we're hearing is it's a workforce cost and timeline issue, not a, ignoring the rules.
Correct, and there's
So,
ways of
hear
doing
you.
that without, we don't have to send inspectors out and do this stuff. There are programs out there where contractors can be educated on how to properly do the work. I guess it's changing the culture, right? You put seatbelts on in your car. You don't have a police officer there telling you you got to do it, right? It's a culture thing. Well, energy efficiency, I see that from my perspective as being a culture of educating our contractors and teaching them how to do this properly. And you don't have so much money, and the other issue is the housing crisis, right? This is really going to, whether people want to hear it or not, is going to impact the cost of housing.
Yes.
And that's just the reality of it.
But if I may, how efficient and energy efficient a house is also affects people's interest in buying it or not. Because no one wants to buy my house right now, where you'd have to turn around and spend $100,000 to $150,000 weatherizing it, putting on solar, so I think it's it's kind of both ways. I mean, and to meet our climate reduction goals, we need to be able to do some of this stuff. So we have to figure out how to do it without adding too much burden.
Well, and we didn't add to the study now, given things are moving fast, but
So
we are concerned about, we want to know back how much money we would need to put into these kinds of programs so that it doesn't make housing unaffordable. Because
Right.
it sounds like the rebates and things we have been pretty static for a long time.
I can't speak to
Right.
to that part of it. I can only, but what I can do is, offering incentives and training people. We certainly do not have, I'm just being honest here with the committee, I have no capacity or bandwidth to take on another program the way I am set up right now.
Yeah.
You're talking, and you also have to look at the behind the scene here. There's single family owner occupied homes.
Right.
We don't regulate single family owner occupied homes, nor do we want to get into single family owner occupied homes. I'm just, but that is just a whole different, that's above my pay grade there, obviously, but there's a lot of discussion about bringing this into enforcement into the construction of single family owner occupied homes.
Oh, with the construction, okay. I thought you were saying you don't want to go into occupied single family homes.
Right, we don't want to get into anything to do with regulating the single family owner occupied home construction industry. We got our hands full now.
Okay.
But there are issues there, as
Right.
you know. There are issues particularly regarding inspections, things like electrical inspections that don't exist there. And you have some very bad situations that resulted about inadequate wiring and essentially nobody's in charge. You can get someone from fire safety, if they happen to be available, to come and take a look at it and give you a little bit of advice, but there's really nothing other than taking the contractors to court and suing them.
So,
Well, do you want to answer that?
Yeah,
so there's
there
no
was
final inspection before occupation of a home?
No, 5 or 6 years ago, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was legislation introduced that would take the handyman exemption out of the 26 BSA under electrical licensing. What that would have done is, in response to natural disasters, it would have required at a minimum a journeyman electrician to sign off on the electrical wiring, to your point, to validate that the wiring is safe before the public utility would re-energize electricity to the, so you bring up a valid point. That bill was reintroduced, I think it was by Representative Shaw. That bill came in 3 consecutive years in a row and it never gained any momentum here. But I understand exactly what you're saying. So we looked at, well, can you do a journeyman is certainly qualified to be looking at wiring in a single family home. But, and the other thing is the membership makeup. I think, in my opinion, there should be somebody from the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association on this.
Sorry, the Vermont which?
Vermont Fuel Dealers Association, and there should be somebody maybe from the retail sector. That is also on this group, on this summer study group. But again, I just want to emphasize, I thought the summer study would be best served if everybody came in with an open mind to look at how we could set up the most efficient and effective program, taking into consideration the economic impact. And this language in this bill right now has us it's already predetermined we're going to be running the show.
And you have not, I'm asking, have you had the opportunity to weigh in before now on this language?
Other than, no, but it's not on this language.
So you weren't able to go into the natural resources?
No.
Okay, I don't think we're gonna be able to do that anything about this week, but this is really helpful for us to know as the bill moves through the process.
So I think that what you're saying is that
Yeah.
Mike's concerns and any changes in this would have to take place in the House.
Should take place in the House, can be discussed with the House and looked at in the conference committee,
But hopefully will be addressed in the House before. it gets-
hopefully, yeah, I mean, hopefully they invite you. I haven't figured out exactly how the committees are dividing up jurisdiction in the House, and it's not my call, but yeah.
Just on the rental code work that you're doing, is there an update on where you are in the process?
Yeah, we've onboarded 3 out of the 4 inspectors.
Statewide.
Statewide.
Great.
The rules have been submitted. We have a public hearing that will be advertised, posted April 20th. So optimistically here, we're gonna get that program off the ground here real soon.
Great.
So, yeah, it's exciting.
It
It's,
it is
And that's
exciting.
a
That
big
came out of
deal.
this, that came out of this.
Right, and that's one way to measure what you're doing.
Yeah, and Mike,
Yeah.
may I just tag on to that? Who can request the health and safety inspector to come? And are you measuring your wait times, on the number of requests versus the ability for you to, with 3 out of 4, respond? Does the health officer have to request, or can a municipal manager request? I have a situation in Bethel that is needing one of your health inspectors because the health officer is one of our failures, and, and being able to
Sure.
get there and do anything about it. For years, this is. So the question I have for you is, does the health officer have to request you, or can the municipal manager, who requests? I can't
Our vision will be just the way that programs have run over the years is most of our complaints that come in usually originate from the tenant. That's normally where it comes from, right? A tenant.
Or the landowner,
Or
because
the
the landlord could.
one or the other. That's where 95% of these complaints will originate from. Once in a while, maybe a concerned neighbor.
Okay.
But as far as response goes, we're gonna have to see where that goes, but our response will be timely. And we are going to track all these complaints.
Good.
There's a lot, in the language, there's a lot to this program, but that's the health officers, we anticipate having a very solid relationship with as many health officers that want to participate and work with us. If there's occasions where a health officer, due to the criticalness of something, we ask them to go do something for us, we will follow up on that particular inspection. They will submit their reports to us. We have generated an inspection checklist, which everybody will use. So a lot more to come on this. We have an IT initiative out there where we can become much more efficient on the reporting end of this. And
Right.
we're going to create a public-facing portal on our webpage, which within a year, this whole IT initiative will be completed, but it'll allow tenants to and architects and so forth to access our database, and they'll be able to check the status of a permit. They'll be able to go into a read-only inspection report that has the proper redaction of private information. So there's a lot of stuff in the works.
Exciting.
It is.
It is
I'm looking
exciting.
forward to it. It's taken longer than I would have hoped to get the program off the ground, but
We're delighted, and thank you, because that is a direct result of this committee's work, so.
so it is coming. I appreciate the patience of everybody, and we keep legal aid and all the other safety advocacy groups updated on that, and we also
Yeah, which is really helpful.
So
Thank you so
Great,
much.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. We really appreciate it. Well,
We
in
have,
touch, yeah.
and we have one small change in the study that we've asked for you most recently on our firefighter bill.
right.
Because there was some concern, given the only sort of trigger for causing cancer that we call out. We have 2 triggers that we want to change. as you look at the study, as you do the study, which is, one is the age, should we be raising the age of firefighters who are covered? And the second is, might we consider other things other than smoking, other PFAS exposures and other harmful chemical exposure to those chemicals is also possibly causing cancer. So those are the two additions we have in our.
So.
Oh, my gosh.
They can just, and this is just my explanation for what we're doing in it, but I can give you the actual language. If you'd like, I can print it out right now for you, but it's just adding to two additional thoughts to explore in the study, two additional concerns to add to the study.
Okay.
And I will.
There you go. So Jen will be patient
I
with
will.
everything that we've asked.
No, I need to
for.
keep that. I'll keep that, but I will send, I'll send you the language and I'll send you my
Thank you very
explanation.
much. And again, on the cancer bill itself, the administration was, trying to grasp more data on the impact of cancer.
But
and stuff and so forth, so.
Well, you should probably leave the building before we come up with a new study for you to take on. Maybe it happens when you do leave the building.
It'll be a busy summer, right?
Yes, we appreciate all your work.
Yeah, we're concerned you're gonna retire, so we're giving you so much exciting work. You're so stimulated, you want to stay forever.
Right.
We have the stay forever Mike DeRocher clause.
No, I think.
Do not vacuum like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, really.
Opposite of what we've been. Thank you, Anne. You're absolutely right.
Thank you, Director Rusher. Thanks. Hi, Stephanie. So you are the woman of the hour because the big overarching question, especially from Senator Cummings' mind, is how can we start to measure our progress on housing? Hopefully you're able to help us figure out how to keep measuring that question. So
Mike, I'm just saying. I'm sending it to you now on email.
I printed out hard copies.
Oh, that's great.
Oh. There is a PDF that
So it's
Scott's been able to.
one,
This is a
So-
multi-pager.
wonderful, okay.
I'll staple together.
And in color.
Yes. So, this might be one way to measure,
Yeah.
at least output,
Okay. Cool.
output so far.
Oh, thank you.
Wow, yay.
So,
Sorry.
a month and a half or several months ago when I was in early in the session. Oh, Stephanie Barrett for the,
Do we have one for
from the
Scott?
Joint Fiscal Office. We do have one for Scott. There we go.
Thanks.
First course is how do you open it?
So
Oh,
it should open like this. It should start to look like this.
All right.
And this was, we were in the process of trying to gather all this information in January and February from VHFA, VHCB, and Housing and Community Development for the funds that have been put out since the beginning of the pandemic to develop housing, and where's the pipeline, what's been the status of the projects, and that's what this packet.
Oh my God.
Wow, this is amazing, and it's
Wow.
exactly an hour old.
No,
too.
well, actually, that's a mistake. I mean, that's when I
no.
printed it today.
Okay.
Okay. This is
No.
actually, the data was up through right before the break, so.
Right.
No, this
We-
is so cool.
So I
Yeah.
put a date on there
By
Because-
town.
by town.
Wow.
The three entities were terrific in getting the information to us, so helpful. And this is through the VHCB's board meeting, the end of January or early February, I can't remember when.
So this is mostly VHCB. It's only VHCB?
No,
Well,
it's mostly, it's all three.
So it's
So.
You want to walk us?
Yeah, we're just
So-
really
So
excited.
most of the money went to most of the money went to VHCB, so
Right.
yes, in that sense, it is mostly VHCB.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
Montpelier had one mental health housing unit. Had 4 units, but one at 90 Barry Street. So this is a big town. We haven't put in.
There you go.
Okay, but let's,
So, so it's mostly driven by the format that VHCB provided to us.
Okay.
And we asked VHFA to provide, their contributions to the projects and other projects that maybe that were, and so we'll see that as we walk through. And so we are summarizing by the 3 entities, the money that has been deployed so far or committed so far. And then the count of projects and units in a summary form on the second page. So that's what you're seeing.
Stephanie, what is the definition of affordable? Because we talk about affordable housing.
Well, there's affordable and perpetually affordable too.
But I just want to know what it affordable to whom?
30% of your income if you're income eligible.
So what's the income cap? I'm trying to figure out if I've got a nurse that's making $60,000 a year, am I building housing for that?
Some of those new definitions in our bill too.
That's
So
what I like.
And we've taken many of these up to 120%, which is
Of what?
area
median.
Okay, in Washington County, that is $74,000 a
So
year
your nurse would be covered.
for a family.
Yeah, so could be 90, it's like the $80,000-$90,000 range.
I think we enabled it up to like 100.
150 in some cases.
Yes, we did up to 120.
well, I think it varies
Chad
with
can
programs. Don't different programs have different amounts?
So
Yes.
I'm not for the
That's
definitions
not
of
right,
what you, how you want
exactly.
to.
Yeah.
But we did more than cover most of our professionals that
Right.
we're the most concerned about.
For rental revolving loan
Believe.
and home ownership, we went up to 150. Some of those programs.
And for middle income, it's higher.
Okay,
Yeah.
For missing middle and for, yeah,
Right.
so we have a big range.
but the first page says affordable rental units. So is that what this is?
That is what, when you appropriated the money,
Yes.
you were appropriating them for affordable housing. And so the VHFA missing middle,
Right.
that not the new proposal,
Right.
but what you
last
find
year's.
is a homeowner targeted, so
Yeah.
that wouldn't be rental.
Okay, so
Yeah.
these numbers are all rental, is that
This is
correct?
just rent.
This
Yeah.
is just rental.
Okay, cool. No, it's so.
Because
And a
that
lot of this is-
program,
yeah.
it's just,
It's just getting going.
Getting going, so there's
Right.
no information on that program, we would
Or-
like
or-
to.
Oh, no, that'll be a different
Yeah,
spreadsheet.
but
Yes.
this was primarily to start.
Yes, to start to,
The homeless issue, that we had people that had been evicted and couldn't find apartments. So this is to deal in large part with the folks that are living up here at the Econo Lodge.
It really
It's
depends, I
really
mean, if you
hard.
look at
There's
these
2
projects.
parents and 2 little kids. that are
Senior
standing
housing.
at the bottom, waiting for the school bus every morning, and they're living in that. I mean, it's just not a good place to be raising kids. But that's who a lot of this is for.
That's the Shires in Bennington is on here, that's all trying to exit people from
Yes.
homelessness.
Barry Recovery Residence, one
Right.
Barry Tiny Home, I think that's in the parking lot. Down street, I think the 27 Granite City Apartments is rehab.
Right, some you can see directly, like South Burlington, Ho-Hum Motel conversion, right? That's,
Yes. that's
some of them, they
amazing.
tried to buy it and rehab it, so it's more
Okay, so
livable.
this is not basically housing for your nurses, your doctors.
Some of it could be.
Some
Some of it could be.
Yeah, the
Really
Bellas
just
Falls one is, and it's
Yeah.
been being worked on for a long
Where,
time,
where?
since 2018. It's under Rockingham, Bellas Falls Garage. That's an example of a project that's been, I mean, it was planned in, I think, 2018 is when they started. And it's for moderate, it's a range of
But it's
incomes.
rental.
Yes.
Yeah, like a lot of what we're doing. in
Right, well,
the
all
junk-
of this
These are
list
all
is rental.
These
yeah.
are all rentals, okay.
we are just getting information on home ownership.
And so this was giving you from the project detail point of view, the total units, because remember, these projects some of them are mixed affordable units and market rate units. They're a mix of funding sources. So it was to give you, and then there's also the status of, it's approved for funding, but it's, when the project right now is hopefully slated for completion. So that's what it was, the layout of this, especially on the long sheet.
Yeah, and I can see there's rental that is still gonna go to workforce rental. I mean, like O'Brien Farms, we're gonna visit, and that's a mix of rental and home ownership. That's square in the employment center of South Burlington. So there is rental properties that will go to workforce as well in here.
And so this, I mean, in one sense, it's just a very plain,
Right.
this is an inventory of what,
That's what
what's
we need.
happened.
This is totally what we need.
There's no analysis of it, or,
No,
but it gives you a foundation to understand, in terms of, what we're accomplishing with the partners out there, and the funding that you have put in. This does not, on the housing bill that you passed out of your committee, it's all
Right,
rear view mirror
yeah,
Right.
funding appropriated up through
yeah,
last year's big bill.
right.
And it does not include any projects done by private entities completely that did not have public funding.
If they didn't go, if they're not funded by they may have other financing.
Right.
But.
And I'm not saying it should at all. I'm just clarifying what this is. This
Right.
is just publicly funded.
Yes.
Correct.
Rental housing since 2020.
Is
But-
this
but on
new
the-
housing?
But it's not completely publicly
Some are
funded
new units.
necessarily.
This
Okay,
is not
because
the
I'm gonna
vehicle.
say, I tried to sell the Callis General Store. It had 3 units that were being rented in it. Actually, one was a house and 2 units. That's listed. They rehabbed them, but it's not 3 new units.
How many is
We
it?
don't, I mean, I
Well,
think
it
rehab
was
is
3 units. There's a house
Can-
that was subdivided.
Sorry.
Can I order
Yeah.
you what's
Yeah,
on these
that's
sheets?
not
And
really-
then it might be
Yeah.
helpful.
Stephanie,
I know,
every
we're
one
like,
of these
okay,
has a story that that Stephanie can't.
That's the hard part of putting down something with a
I
lot of
know.
detail on it. Everyone starts going.
I know.
Right, but we
So-
love it, thank you, and we'll let you talk now.
Okay, so on the big, long colored sheets.
Yeah.
The rental projects funded since 2020 through December 2022, it's actually probably, funded because of that, the board, they submitted the approved projects on their January board as well, and here I should change the date on that. But these are the VHFA and VHCB funded rental projects on the first page of the long sheet, and over onto the top of the next page. The VHCB shelter projects, very few of those have also VHFA funding, are the next block on the second page. So this can flip over.
Yeah.
And then onto the third page, pulling out the mobile home projects at the top. And then there are, VHFA provided us with their acquisition and rehab projects. Those would be, they're not getting, you can see there's not VHCB money in the orange block, but it gives you a sense of, from their resources, other projects that are being funded. So in order to give you as full a picture as possible.
Okay, because Good Samaritan Haven isn't new beds. They've been there
Yes,
forever.
but these
Welcome
are
Center.
maintaining,
Right.
Right,
um,
and at the end where it says percent of development cost, that's state money.
that's by the combined VHCB or VHFA resources that are, so that column is
Yeah,
against the total development column. So the total development column, which is right in the middle, that's what It's the combined VHCB and VHFA column just divided into, and it's arranged all over the place. It was just a.
But we can assume that the combined dollars they use are kind of our dollars, that's the public dollars. Or could there be other public?
So not all VHFA money comes through the state, they have the federal and their own, and their own.
I guess
the-
public
the-
dollars.
The low income housing.
Yes,
Yeah, low
okay.
income housing tax credit.
So kind of public,
So it's state and
All
federal.
public.
the percent is public dollars, that went into that.
So the last category, I think you will find that those are some private, the sources there were partners. And I'm gonna let VHFA.
I'm trying to figure it out, because it's got Montpelier St. Albans, which is an interesting combination. Heritage Lane and the Lane Shops, the actual
Sorry, which
factory,
chart are you on?
I'm on the last one, VHFA acquisition and rehab. The Lane Shops have been owned or managed by Montpelier Housing, and they were converted into apartments, elderly and disabled, they're public housing. And then the condos, which are all market rate, were publicly owned. So I'm trying to figure out, I could see where maybe a private developer bought out the Lane Shops in Montpelier. And
This is all gonna be much more specific than Stephanie.
yeah, so I wonder if VHFA, since they were the acquisition.
Well, let's see if there's
Or
any other
rehabilitation.
general.
Or, yeah.
But it's owned by Montpelier Housing.
So
I mean, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, that might be an offline conversation with Maura, who, yeah. Well, I mean, I think between Maura and Gus, they probably have touched every single one of these projects and know them
I
very
just get
well.
concerned when I've got a public housing project being bought by a private developer.
Right, we can't answer that. This is a very broad brush, so.
And
Which I
that's
think
what,
we
that's
want.
what the
Yeah.
intention was, to try and put as much as we could know
Right.
out in
Right.
some sort of organized fashion with
Yeah.
the information that
Yes,
is available.
exactly.
And so,
It's very.
so
appreciated.
the long pages in this packet are essentially the VHFA and VHCB projects.
Right.
And our hope is that we can continue to update this inventory,
Yes.
and periodic,
Great. We really
as
appreciate that.
things march forward, you'll pass more money for housing, we have money in the VAA. So that's
Yes.
and over time, if the format of it needs to change, but that's the hope.
Yeah.
And then flipping off of the two long pages to the 3 pages in the back,
Oh, yeah.
now we're in VHIP.
Great.
Okay.
So you've got,
Wow, you have the people, where it is and the people,
So this is
Sorry,
by the
wonderful.
home ownership
This
center.
is basically behind it, there's 3 pages that are
oh
little.
my God, there we are.
And so this doesn't give as much, it gives unit information and it gives the grant amount, but it doesn't, it gives, it doesn't, these are committed dollars, but the status of the
Does
project.
this include ADUs?
It includes anything that got a grant.
But this is VHIP grants, does it include the the
ADU
accessory dwelling unit?
Those are from the
They were
same
a
pot of money.
subdivision
Yeah,
called out in the
Yeah.
VHIP
Yeah.
of last year.
so if the project is an ADU and is awarded a grant,
Here.
it's here.
Right,
Um,
okay, good.
So this would be, units brought up to code and new units,
if they're
ADUs.
Yeah.
That's great. This is so helpful.
And so this is the report that maybe gets a little bit more detailed in the next iteration, because
Right.
the most of the VHIP money that's showing here is, the grants for new construction, the higher amounts. I think that's coming in the amounts of money that we are newly appropriating
Well, Vince
more
got his.
than.
Newport
I'm
got
sorry.
Let's Stephanie
Vince has a
finish
good
hers.
portion of Montpelier.
This is like candy.
I know, we're
I
just
mean, like,
really,
I
really
can't put it on the
excited.
floor. People are gonna like, freak out. Sorry, Stephanie.
So I think, I know that VHCB has done a map of one of their subsets of projects, and we were going to try and map this. This is not the time in the
Oh.
office at the moment to
So that's
focus on
in-
how to.
Yeah.
Future
But-
enhancement.
Yeah.
but that's, it was a lot of effort from the folks that we were making demands of to say, please send it.
Thank
And
you,
to sort
everyone.
through it.
Well,
And
it's
it's a-
great. It's
um,
just so useful.
And is this valuable to you?
Yes, when you guys ask questions, it's
well,
very
right,
valuable.
But do you see, I mean, this seems like something that would be really valuable to lots of folks. Right.
I mean, I find information like this gets your feet sort of firmly on the ground when you're talking about what did we buy with the money we sent out?
exactly.
Right.
And different programs by different numbers of units, but they have different qualities,
Yeah.
so.
And then understanding, the mixes that happen because of the nature of
Makes for
the
good
project.
Yeah. What we've been talking about a lot in here is the recent value of having our, bringing John Adams from, what is it, GIS, Geospatial
Vermont Center for Geographic Information.
Information. So bringing them in, and they have mapped for us areas of the state that are designated areas, municipal water and sewer areas, places where we're targeting housing development right now. I'm not asking you to do this, but this is obviously a list that goes in some alphabetical order or chronological order by project and town. I think eventually for us, it's really nice to see it spatially in the state. So we can say, oh, Rutland County got this many new units, this downtown, this neighborhood development area is, that's not for you to necessarily do, but it does help us say, how is the state doing in a visual way?
Yeah, that's great. So that would actually be, it could, like the GIS coordinates could be another data point. Like what I'm thinking is at this point, we should identify any additional data that would be helpful in the future. Because I would think this would be used for years, right? I would hope, because I mean, tracking what we do is just so important.
I mean, we had a very sort of defined start point. And you've heard that Selig say it, when beginning that we had to switch from a mode of scarcity pre-pandemic in terms of the funding for housing.
Exactly.
To the with the federal money to the ability to resource more.
Right.
And so it is sort of defined from that basic March 2020 CRF money, then ARPA money, our one-time general fund resources. And so I'm thinking maybe in terms of, when those tail out in terms of being expended, you'll have this universe of what you were able to do with the resources. The level of resources, as a fiscal person, I don't see that continuing necessarily at the level it has been.
But all the money that we have appropriated will start being actively spent, so.
It could, yes.
But that's only just beginning.
And
this is, we're 3 years in and there was with the CRF money that went out in the very, 3 years ago in the CRF bills, that was a very quick response in terms of the shelters and things. So this is trying to incorporate all of it. And so you will have a defined timeframe eventually.
Well, there was a very quick response to our $35 million bond in 2017.
I think for our conversations in the next couple of years, this isn't just a you question, but we'll want to know how much money was spent on permits and appeals and any timeline delays. And that's kind of something else that I'm curious about, that I don't know if we can start to.
And I don't know if that's, if that's through the HCB or more through NRB or through.
That would be through a different.
It could, VHCB has this information anecdotally. But then, that's really helpful for us to know, even if you look at all these projects, they all probably had X dollars that went to permits. And we would be able to say, how much did that cost?
Well, I mean, I know one of the ADU recipients quite well.
Okay.
And she's listed here, and so we could actually find out how much was spent on permitting.
Right. Well, that's.
I mean, I think that's the kind of thing you're gonna have to ask individually, because every town is different.
And from the VHIP projects to the projects here on the bigger projects, that permitting is probably a very different
Right,
experience.
right, absolutely.
And one thing, when you try to figure what's permitting cost, there is that cost that is not recorded,
Absolutely.
which is huge. The cost is not recorded is the preparation
It's
time, all of the preparation that you have to do, the experts that you have to hire, and those are substantial costs that don't appear on the books anywhere.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, just when we talk about permitting, we just think Act 250 is all permitting, but there are permits that would be required whether or not there's Act 250.
Absolutely,
Which is
yeah.
the majority of the expense and the time.
Right.
So we just have to be careful about that. And then just one other thing I thought might be helpful to capture would be the rental rates of the units. I don't know if there's a way to do that. I'm not saying like change this now, but I'm saying when we're gathering information, that might be a good data point to have.
That's a,
Just the rental that people pay.
but that's a changing number.
Oh, yeah,
over time.
totally.
So
And in different units.
And
It could be a
it's all
two-bedroom. it could be-
priority
no, I know, but-
housing? I mean, is 80% of this market rate?
I think it's all different, right? New
It's all
affordable
different.
units.
It's all.
That's a
I mean,
whole
I'm
category.
just looking at the places I know, none of these are in nice neighborhoods. So and none of it is new housing, it's rehab. You're gonna get a lot less pushback on rehabbing a house in what is already a struggling neighborhood than you are if you're trying to put a project in a nice neighborhood.
Well, and I'm not sure we should characterize it, but I want to just say that on these, on the ones you're talking about, and there on this first sheet, this was a priority housing project here in Springfield. And it's right downtown, right in the center of downtown. So it's actually not, there are homes around it, but it's right in the center of downtown. And it's made a huge difference. Oh my God, it's cleaned up that whole corner. And it's just
Yeah,
terrific.
if that's Matt Dunn's project, he says. he
No, it's
can't.
not.
It's not, because
Well, we're
Matt
still
said,
working on that Dunn's
yes,
project.
he's trying to get it, but he can't.
It's a
he
challenge.
He can't get people to buy there at market rate, is what he was saying.
But we're working on it.
Yeah.
And it's just his
I think
project, as you know. kind
Each of
falls
these is very unique, that's a question we'd have to ask
Market
the
rate.
HCD or the HFA.
Springfield and
They
Lexington.
are very thoughtful about where they place things near services and transportation lines and, make them beautiful and livable and improve neighborhoods, so.
And in Brattleboro, they have improved neighborhoods significantly and
Right.
improved the value of the properties around them and saved a lot of good historic buildings.
Anything else you want to add?
No, I'm happy to take your recommendations on what you want added to this. That has to be sort of vetted through the burden that might put on the people that are actually producing the information.
And I just,
Yeah, and we might have you here with Gus and Maura and others who can say, the legislature would need to enable us to collect some of this data, et cetera, like Maura's been talking about the landlord certificate and units and grand lists and things.
So we're hopeful the landlord certificate will be discussed at length in that.
Right, and some of this Maura is putting on housingdata.org in the form of, something that's.
But
easy to understand.
this is the housing that we built with state, basically ARPA
federal.
dollars. The thing that we don't have is how many units are being built by private developers, not heavily subsidized by the state. That's the other.
That's a data question that we have to help, especially in
Yes.
finance, unravel.
Some of these are a combination.
But you may have private developers at the high end that are,
Yeah.
doing it, something very different. And I don't know how much high-end rental is being developed now anywhere, but.
I'm talking about who's building homes or maybe private, privately financed, privately sold.
Right.
Where the private market is. This is where we don't have that.
So I don't, but
that's a
PBR may
part of the-
collect, I don't know to the extent that PBR collects permits for a new home build, a
Yeah.
single family home build.
Exactly.
And, how many bedrooms, you could map that.
They don't, the grand list do not have numbers of units. And we're gonna be looking at, they have the number of houses, but not the number of.
And that's probably something, if you wanted that, because that's you pull a permit in a town.
Yeah.
That the listers pick it up in their process, that gets fed back to PBR. So I just don't know the details there. It might be something that's actually, you'd have to ask the PBR to collect from the towns in a more granular detail.
And that got bigger, that's
Yeah.
bigger than,
Yeah.
it's not a simple solution.
No.
But that is an important
Yeah,
piece
I
of the
mean,
puzzle.
I'm sure somewhere out there is a ratio of public to private development that would indicate a healthy market.
I certainly know some of the bigger population centers are collecting that information for themselves.
Yeah.
And they're getting granular about the race of homeowners and, things that eventually in our bigger population centers tell us, how are we doing with the racial homeownership gap and, demographics, where are young people moving in to buy homes? What is so our bigger communities are trying to better understand their own housing market. We're so far from that in the state, we don't even have the number of units, so.
But we're getting there.
We're getting,
This
this is great.
Wonderful, thank you.
So
This is super.
what is like a regular, is it an annual check-in on this, or?
I think that, if we could update in the late fall, because you're coming back,
Yeah.
that would be it seems like the ideal time to, produce this in early January every year.
Okay,
for-
great,
Would be not a bad thing to do.
great.
Just a question for the future, if there's any takeaways in terms of policy that you have noted, if you could let us know at some point.
I
But
don't think I have that. It's a lot of money.
is it what you
Committed.
expected?
I don't know if I had expectations, but it's
Let's look at it.
in terms of, sometimes we are very, we
become
appropriate money, but it's very slow getting out.
Uh-huh.
This it's an admirable amount of money committed in a relatively short period of time.
Okay.
And you're talking bricks and mortar here. It's gonna take the time,
That's notable.
to have it fully come to fruition, but that's, yeah.
All right, and that actually informs our 3-year timeframe that we're talking about. This is very helpful when we consider that. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you for connecting those dots.
And somewhere along the way here, we will probably get some mapping capacity.
Right.
Oh, we will,
Yeah.
we will.
Yeah, we're already partway there. Well, thanks so much, Stephanie. I'm gonna let the committee go, because we've been sitting for a long time before the floor in 10 minutes. So
Do we get a whole 10
Yeah.
minutes? No, I'm kidding. This is
so-
really, really good.
Yeah, this is
What do I
hopefully
do with all this
something.
extra time?
No, right.
Absorb that.
Is there life after sitting and looking at charts?
So we'll go off live and we are done for the day. I believe S100 will get out of appropriations tomorrow, so it'll be up on the floor.